Okay, sounds
Okay,
good.
Hi, I'm Christina.
I'm Natalie.
Natalie, nice to meet you. Hi, Christina.
Adam Case, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for taking the opportunity to sit down with us today. As you know, our client Gabriel Hart is one of the most ardent believers in Cryptholler's mission, and the negotiations we're doing here today really present us with an excellent opportunity to reach a solution that benefits both parties and allows us to go forward in a very practical manner. But to really give some backbone to these discussions today, we'd like to set an agenda of things we want to make sure we discuss.
Okay, so
Sure.
So the first item we'd like to discuss today are potential new protocols for the security system of the Cryptholler app, both the design of those new protocols, and in addition to the design and getting those formulated, also their integration, making sure they can go into the smartphones and really begin benefiting people all over the world. Also, we'd like to discuss publishing of the Rho Alpha proof. There has been rumors around with that publication. We'd like to address some of those issues today. Then we'd like to discuss the old protocol as it relates to going forward in the future. We know there's some problems with it, but we have some questions we'd like to ask about it. And finally, we'd like to talk about design recognition for the new protocols, design, integration, old protocols, and other situations where Mr. Hart has been integral to the development of this program. Now, as we understand it...
Well, just quickly, is there anything else that you'd like to add to the agenda here?
Yeah, I think so, and we appreciate you guys kind of moving forward with an agenda. I mean, I think for us it's really important to take a step back and think about sort of why we're here and who our client is and what her interests are, and be able to explain that to you so that you know where we're coming from.
We were hoping we could do that by, walking through the list here. So we have a lot of questions regarding just the technology side of it and what you're really looking for.
And before we get to those questions, I think it's important for our client to be able to share with you exactly who she is, because who she is independent of these items here, and I think it would help the negotiations run a lot more smoothly if we're able to give you more of the background and the underlying interests of where our client's coming from. So if you don't mind, we're going to take a moment to be able to do that. So our client is Miss Frank, and as we're both well aware, she is the leader and sort of the brain behind the Cryptol Project Foundation, KPF. So for our client, there's a very personal attachment to the work that she does, given her experience in working with developing countries as a child to now. And with that said, with her interests come a need for security of the cryptols that are currently in place, to be financially stable and responsible for her organization, and control such that she's able to make sure that the cryptos that currently exist can continue to exist for the communities that it's placed in. With that said, she's been able to be very successful with the cryptos that are currently in place, as we've seen her grassroots approach by working with small businesses and the citizens using the cryptol method. So, when it comes to this negotiation today, she does not see this as a dispute between our two clients. There's a much bigger mission here, which is to make sure that the communities that the cryptol is currently in will continue to thrive and allow developing countries to continue to be successful. So we just want to make sure that that's an underlying interest of both of our parties, and from our understanding, your client is an advent supporter of that.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and I think in Adam's introduction, he kind of mimicked that our client is really looking forward to being able to move forward with this. And our client does have some other concerns that are related to his reputation and some of this design recognition, but I also think this offers us a really excellent opportunity to be able to move forward, because we're sitting here and this is a situation where we can walk out of this and both of our clients can be happy. So again, I think furthering your client's goal while also keeping in mind some of our clients' interests is going to be something that we can definitely do today. With that in mind, our understanding of the system is, it's a little complicated, all these technical terms. So our understanding is the anti-circumvention technology is really being used to make the cap workable, right?
Correct.
And with that cap, I apologize for these tech questions. If I understood computer science, I would not have gone to law school.
We're all attorneys here.
So in order to make that transfer cap, so people in third world countries are doing small transactions and kind of fly under the radar from their corrupt governments, you need that anti-circumvention technology to enforce that cap. But what that anti-circumvention technology has done has opened up for the possibility of counterfeiting, which is something that neither of our clients want. And as our client understands it, the ways to fix the counterfeiting is either to eliminate the transfer cap, which might hurt the mission of your client, or to institute new protocols. Is that a correct understanding? Is there a third option our client does not let us aware of? What option would be best for your client going forward?
Okay, so I think there was a lot in there. I mean, I think you have a great assessment of the situation. I mean, you said that you're not, savvy about technology, but I think that's exactly it. So in terms of what our client is looking for, as you know, and as they've discussed, our two clients have disagreed over the transfer cap. And that's something that our client believes is necessary to ensure that the right people are using this technology. And as we mentioned, her passion and her goal in this in this entire project is so that small businesses can be the ones to benefit, and that we can avoid corrupt, they say gangster governments to prevent those.
None of us
from
want the
being
gangster
able to
governments,
use,
right?
No.
Right, to prevent those from being able to use this technology. So for her, the transfer cap is going to be absolutely essential.
So we should then focus our discussion on trying to find a way of making new protocols that would work going forward?
Exactly. So looking at the agenda that we have set there under potential new protocols, it's certainly going to be new protocols. And by protocols, our client specifically refers to new encryptions that can take the place of the old ones.
And in terms of instituting those new protocols, does your client have any plans for what will be done with the old protocols, seeing as they don't work in the CryptDollar app? Would they just be deleted, or does your client have other plans?
I mean, I think our client still sees the value of those protocols, and she sees that, it's possible that maybe if they're not used for this system, they'd be used for others.
Does she
And
have
I think
other-
I wanted to add to, you asked
Right.
if there was something that we had to add to the agenda. I
Certainly.
think one thing that's very much in our interest is to be able to talk about, in moving forward, to talk about sort of the public relations approach to this, because what we have is a situation where right now, with what your client had previously installed, there are some security issues that might make donors feel hesitant about the safety of this, about this technology. It might make the users a little bit hesitant. So I think, having solid public relations going forward is something that's going to be important.
And so as to that, on just a question about that public relations item that was just added, what in particular are your concerns here? So you mentioned there's some concerns about the donor base. Have there been things published in the media already that we're not aware of?
I mean, as of right now, I think it's clear that in the media there is the conjecture that's currently out that we're both aware of.
Right.
However, I think more fundamentally, it's about, for our client, being able to advertise this CryptDoll and the amazing work that it's been doing in the communities. And with your client as a supporter of that, I think it's important for our client that the message continues to be spread. And I think with increased awareness comes increased support for our client.
And go ahead, Elsa.
Oh, thank you. So, we appreciate, you guys have probably a lot of questions for us. We have a lot of questions for you too, and I think especially since we're talking about new protocols and we're talking about encryptions, we're wondering whether your client has come up with ideas for a new encryption software that would be able to fix the server, to be able to fix the current encryption issues, new beyond anything that he's shared with our client.
So we're happy to report that our client has been able to find new encryption technology that would be able to make the system sound. So we're coming today with this encryption technology that could be implemented and we think could be very advantageous for keeping your mission going. But we do have some concerns, and one of those concerns is how this relates to those old protocols. So you mentioned your client is wondering, thinking that they might do something with those old protocols. Can you elaborate further? Are there is there any information about what those could be worth to your client?
It's certainly exciting that your client has the new protocols, because entering this negotiation today, that
Right.
wasn't clear for our client.
Certainly.
And so in regards to the old protocols, it's certainly something that our client views as her property, given that those were protocols that were developed with company resources. But I think along that same line, and it seems like your client is concerned about sharing the new encryption technology and is tying that to the use of the old protocols. What is he looking for? Is he looking to receive the old protocols back? And if so, what does he want to do with the old protocols?
Well, as you said earlier, your client believes that the old protocols are her baby, the thing that she developed. But similarly to Mr. Hart, after putting in so much design work to the old protocols, not only does he feel that they're partly his baby as well, but he really feels that the new protocols were something that he developed. So it would be of interest to our client, both to benefit the CryptDollars going forward and Mr. Hart. Would your client be open to a straight up trade, new workable protocols for the old protocols?
So, it sounds like he's viewing these old protocols as something that he put a lot of time, resources, and effort
correct.
into. And so, our client similarly sees that as something that she's put time, resources, and effort into. In this case, it would be, throughout the course of your client's employment. So when you mention a trade,
And so
do you see that these two are of equivalent value to your client to be able to, pretty cleanly be able to exchange new encryption protocols for old protocols?
If not necessarily in equivalent value, as you see in the agenda, there's a lot of other items we'd like to discuss today, but I just wanted to ascertain if that is something your client would be open to discussing as part of a larger package.
And again, I think a large part of this is we could sit here all day and argue who owes what to who and whom owns what protocols, right? And I think the reason why we're sitting here is because that's foggy and neither of us wants to waste the time or resources in going to court because that's a pain, right? So I think what we're trying to drive at here is just gather more information about what your client is looking to do with these. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the old protocols might be of some value to your client. As far as I'm understanding, there's no definitive value that she's provided you with. And then the new protocols, you're really needing these to keep the cap going. Is that a correct understanding?
I think it's correct to say that we don't have an exact dollar value, and I think you're right. And we're not here, as Christina mentioned, we're not here to have any kind of debate between the two clients. I think we have so much to work on moving forward here. And I think our client really is interested in having an arrangement where there are new protocols, and we can talk about what that looks like.
So I think in the interest of time here, we've addressed the potential new protocols, and we have discussed some of the old protocols and the public relations piece a little bit, and we can get into more detail as we go through our offers and counteroffers. But you've mentioned design recognition is important to your client. Can you elaborate on what that looks like for him?
Right. So it was a big breakthrough for him to develop these new protocols. So some sort of public recognition, because as you know, he's trying to further his career as a mathematician. So when we speak to his reputational goals here, a lot of that is driving and making sure that he's recognized for being a mathematician that can come up with these things. Part of something else that he's looking for, and this addresses that integration element of the potential new protocols that might be introduced, is some sort of compensation. So I know the last time we spoke, numbers were kind of thrown around. Where is your client on that issue now?
On the issue of compensation?
Right, on the issue of compensation for the integration of the new protocols.
I think our client is open to compensating your client for new protocols. I think maybe it'd be best if we put forward the numbers that our client was looking at, and in generally what she's looking to see here, knowing that your client feels as though he would like to be recognized for that design. I think what I'll address first is this idea of publishing the rho alpha theorem. I think it's going to be a little bit tough to work out the details of that, given that we know that theorem can actually, that having that proof out there can actually compromise the security system. So what we would need is, at the very least, 6 months to be able to make sure that any new program was viable, that it worked, because we can't afford to compromise this system that provides funding to developing countries. So in terms of new encryption protocols, it seems like your client is excited about the work he's done and is excited to have that implemented, and it seems like he really supports the work that the Cryptaller project does. So what we would do is that it would be, or at least what our client was looking at was that your client would be able to install this encryption software that he's designed. She'd be willing to pay him for this work, his standard fee. She'd like to pay him in Cryptallers, and that's something actually that she feels very strongly about, that this is something that really assures people of the security of the Cryptals. And so I think, given that your client wants that recognition,
So
he would be paid the normal fee. I'll be done in just a second.
Yeah, certainly.
And then that also he would be able to get recognition for it.
Okay.
And you had a question?
Oh yeah, I was just going to ask, is there no sort of circumstances we could come to today where he'd be able to be paid in US dollars? Is it only Cryptals?
She's only authorized us to talk about Cryptals today, and I think, again, that just reflects, to the public that could possibly have concerns about the safety of this system,
Right.
that we would be able to show that this is something that really is viable. In terms of the old protocols, we are willing, because it seems like what he's talking about here is a switch, and we are willing to transfer ownership given that he feels really strongly about the time and effort he's put in. But in addition to that, I mean, I think as part of transferring ownership, our client, given that this also reflects work and time and effort she's put into, that she would receive 40% in case, if he was selling or licensing these old protocols, that she would receive 40% of the proceeds. Not 50%, because we recognize that this, is a transfer of ownership, and there's going to be some work on the part of your client if he was to to sell or license this. But it would be 40% of gross profits, just given that, she was employing your client to do this work. He wasn't doing it for free.
Okay. So I just have a couple of questions about what is thrown up here on the board. So my first question sort of is, I noticed you said publication after 6 months. Is there a reason for that 6-month delay?
Certainly. I mean, our client, as we discussed earlier, has a very large concern with the security of the cryptols as they currently are. And so before there is a publication about what the old cryptols, what can happen to the old cryptols, our client's looking for time to be able to ensure that the new cryptols that are installed are successfully installed and are running smoothly, such that there wouldn't be a concern of needing to perhaps interchange the cryptols again.
So do you have specific information about exactly how long it will take in order for those cryptols to be installed?
I mean, as we've shared, we'd like the new encryption protocols to be installed by Mr. Hart, and so it really is with Mr. Hart's work about how long it would take for him to install these new encryptions, as he's, and happily so for our client, has already created. And so what we're hoping is, given that process, he can install them as soon as possible, and we'll have a 6-month leeway to allow it to have a successful run.
And recognizing the work that both Mr. Hart and Crypthol gave into the old protocols, if we were doing a straight-up trade with the new protocols, which were entirely developed by Mr. Hart, why would your client feel they would then be entitled to 40% of anything Mr. Hart does with his side of the trade, receiving the old protocols?
I'm sorry, so your question is asking if we're doing a straight-up trade, the new protocols without any payment?
I think that's what you put on the board, old protocol transfer. So transfer the protocols, but then you'd want 40% of the profits from anything our client does. Where does that 40% number come from?
For clarification, there's not a trade either that's proposed here. I think it's an entire package, and there's clearly payment of the normal fee that would go to your client. But I think Abby wants to speak more on regards to why there's a 40% of gross profits there.
So as I mentioned before, I think when we explained this 40% comes from the fact that, if your client had done the work for free for this company, I think it would make sense that those were entirely his, but he was working on these encryptions in the course of his employment, and so they are something that belongs to the company, and not to say that he didn't put effort and time and research into it. And I think he's clearly proud of that work, and the fact that we're willing to transfer that ownership is a recognition of the work he's done on that. But I think here we are paying your client a normal fee for the work he's doing, and so I think it might be different, and I'm curious to see what you are kind of saying about just a trade, because a trade, perhaps if it was a pure trade, it wouldn't make sense to have any sort of profit sharing. But as it is, we are paying for new software, and we have paid for old software. And so this is a transfer, but retaining at least 40% of the profits.
I think all we were really driving at with that is there's this new technology information that our client has come up with, and there's the old, right? And we currently own that new technology, and your client currently has possession of the old. So I agree that there's going to be some sort of fee that goes into this, and it's a package as a whole, but I think our misunderstanding really comes from where that 40% number is coming from, because it does seem quite high from our perspective.
So it sounds like your concerns with this, at least, the biggest concern appears to be the old protocols. And just to make sure I'm hearing it correctly, your client has expressed interest in this ownership of the protocols given his attachment to them, but that the 40%, is too high. I think, given the other aspects of the offer, we'd be more than happy to hear how you feel about the other parts, and then, see how you address the amount of gross profits from your own perspective of your client.
I think at this time we'd like to take a break and come back to you with a counteroffer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have an offer which we think will be agreeable to both parties.
And I think in the context of your offer, if you could maybe let us know where you stand on some of the PR things we've mentioned.
Exactly, and that is part of our offer, which you will see.
So, in terms of the first element of this, which is publication of the proof, we require to publish the proof, but we've listened to what you've said about a big concern of yours really being that this proof is going to get out there and it will really damage the integrity of the application. So we'll agree to only do so after the integration is complete, which gets rid of some of the ambiguity around the 6 months that I think we were both kind of driving at. But academic paper publishing does move fairly quickly, so that is a big concession on our part. And in terms of the new protocol, we'd be willing to integrate them. But it would mean if we're getting paid in cryptos and that's kind of a more stagnant currency, it's not able to be moved around as quickly, and our client doesn't live in a developing country, he'd be asking for 6 times his current rate in cryptos. And then in addition to that, some recognition as to the design. In addition, in terms of that, in regards to this specifically, in any press releases, he'd be referred to as the lead tech designer. In terms of those old protocols that we were talking a lot about, he'd really need outright ownership of those, especially given the fact that he's going to wait longer to publish that proof. And then, in terms of the PR capacity, he'll agree to act in this way, and we can discuss exactly what your client is looking for out of that, but we'd be willing to work with you on those items. So do you have any specific questions right off the bat?
Yeah, I think we do. So I guess I have questions. You're mentioning, outright ownership because of a delay in publishing the proof. Was your client planning on publishing the proof before introducing the new encryption software? It seems like, he actually wouldn't be really in his interest to have published that proof before, given that that's something that would have damaged this company that he says that he's been a supporter of, and he clearly has been a supporter of.
In his current position as a mathematician, as we're all aware of someone who spent way too long in academia, going to law school and everything else, we know how quick-paced academic publishing can be. And as Mr. Hart pointed out while he was with Crypthol, that anyone can publish this findings at any time. It's only a matter of time. So a delay of 6 months in the fast-moving world of mathematics really is a large concession on his part. And that is something he's very worried about, that his new career as a mathematician, if someone beats him to that punch, well, then all this work he had done will be almost for nothing.
But again, that's something that we are willing to work with you on today, just because we understand that seems to be the key concern of your client here, if I've been hearing you correctly. So that's why we said after the integration is complete, only then will he publish a proof, which should give your client some assurances that he's not going to jump the gun and do it early.
So when you mention sort of the fast-paced nature of publishing, and it seems to me, from the information we have, is it actually doesn't move terribly quickly. It seems like actually there was some time between when he first came up with this idea of the theorem and some, that was before the NDA, and then, there was a lot of time between then and his signing the NDA and that coming out. And so it seems like to me, if publishing a proof actually doesn't move all that quickly, it seems to me that, having this come out after 6 months, really 6 months in the grand scheme of things isn't that wrong.
We just know our client has really indicated to us that as soon as he can publish it, the better, right? So as much as we can question exactly what our client has told us about his interest, that's what he's indicated to us today. So again, in return for that, publishing only after the integration is complete, that sort of informs the rest of our offer.
So I do have a question about the amount of cryptols that your client is looking for.
Right.
6 times his normal fee. I think from our understanding, your client recognizes that our client represents a charitable organization, and so we're curious why he sees the value of six times the cryptols for his work. If we're also interested in providing the old protocols, and if we were to agree on these other things, what specifically does that number 6 times mean for your client?
Right, and we know that's what he mentioned before. That sort of his previous offer was 6 times. So what is it about that 6 times that really feels strongly about?
In the world of tech integration, for a program especially as strong-willed as this, if you're going to a major technological company who's going to develop and then integrate these technologies, they're going to have their fee. And their fee will be very hard in US dollars. A cryptocurrency commonly used in developing countries might not necessarily be something that would be interested to a large technological firm. So seeing how there is a transfer cap, which allows what is considered small transactions in a developing country versus a large technological consulting contract in the United States, given that, as we've seen from various cryptocurrencies over the years, the instability of fluctuations in their value, and given the fact that cryptols aren't really an accepted medium in developed countries like the United States, it would be a big ask if he wasn't to receive dollars, but he still was to do this high-level work. He would need more compensation than his standard consultation fee.
Okay, so what is your, thank you for the currency lesson there. In regards to why that specific amount, and we see the difference in the cryptol versus the dollar, but for our client, the cryptol represents something much more symbolic for the cause, right? Like to have someone who's an acclaimed mathematician support this organization and then ultimately use these cryptols, like that's also an interest of our client, is to see this become successful. And I think there's two like, is your client looking for direct pay for his services, or is he looking for an opportunity to be recognized for the work that he's done?
He's really
and I think
looking
if that's
for
clear,
both,
then that will help
right.
us determine exactly how we can move forward in this negotiation.
Yeah, he's really looking for both things. So he's looking for both that recognition as well as the cryptols. So it seems like there are some concerns about that 6 times being too many, especially being a charitable organization. Is there another times that would make more sense for your client?
I mean, I think, you mentioned that the reason behind that is that's what would be available at a major tech company. And as you know, this is not a major tech company. I mean, this is a charitable organization.
I apologize, as if you went to a major tech company to come in and do the integration. Not that you are a tech company, but integrating a brand new protocol for your software would require IT expertise.
Right, so his rate is based on something that if we were to hire a major tech company to do this. So, I mean, I think as you know, this is a charitable organization, and so, when we offer to pay him a normal fee, we thought that would be exactly that, a normal fee.
So if the
and so it seemed like, even if it is in cryptols, that what we wanted to offer was something that was reasonable to him.
So are you really not authorized
if
to
there
go
are
over that?
cryptols, the cryptols is an issue. I'm just going to
I'm just.
my thought here. If cryptols are a particular issue, I mean, I think that's good for us to know. I mean, I think, like as we've said, cryptols will be the currency that we pay him in, and so I think that's worthwhile to know that for him there's some time or effort lost in the fact that he's using cryptols as opposed to something else. So we can talk about that, and I think when we talk about the context of everything we've offered, I noticed that it would just be outright ownership, and I wonder sort of knowing where our client is coming from on the fact that she's put her time and resources and effort into paying your client, into paying other employees to work on these old encryptions, sort of how you see that being recognized.
Just quickly before we get to that, I have a couple questions in regards to what you said with those cryptols. So the 6 times cryptol seems to be something that your client can't do today. Is there another percentage or another times that would make a lot more sense for your client, or is the most you can pay him 1 times the amount of cryptols?
I mean, I think I think the purpose of us talking about this today is recognizing that we're coming from different perspectives.
So to answer your question, 6 times is too much for our client and is out of their zone. If you're asking for a specific number, we can provide you that.
Certainly.
But we'd like to address your other questions first before that occurs.
Okay.
That you mentioned you had.
Okay.
So are there other questions that you had?
Yeah, my concern was just more so if the 6 times cryptos doesn't work, I was kind of looking for whatever the next offer would be so we could sort of resolve this issue and move forward.
Right, and I think for us it would be really good to know sort of where because again, this very much all in context. So, my question about addressing the time and effort that our client put into with regard to that, the old protocols, sort of how you see that sort of being addressed here.
You mentioned that a benefit to the cryptols would really be a sign of acceptance for this new currency and would do a lot for the nonprofit. But on the other hand, it's being mentioned that because there's a nonprofit, the fee if using cryptols would be more significant. So is it of more concern to your client to be seen using cryptols for this transaction or to keep those finances under control? Because if we were dealing in US dollars, which I believe you indicated earlier isn't a possibility, the numbers would have a lot more liberty.
Right. If we were dealing in US dollars, and I understand that's not within your authority today, but that one times is something that we could agree to today.
Right, it's not. I think for
Right.
the sake of moving forward, it's not. However, I think to keep the conversation
Certainly.
moving forward, we do have an offer for you.
Right, and especially reflecting the fact that to you, cryptols are somehow more difficult
Right.
for him to consider. So I think our client understands that. I think she would be willing to pay twice the normal fee just to recognize that effort that it would take for him to exchange the cryptols. I think what we really are looking for with the 6 months is that this integration is successful, that there is no question as to its viability. I mean, the real concern here, as you've addressed, is that the issue is the fact that this proof would destroy the system in effect. I mean, whoever wanted to could destroy the old system. So as long as it takes for there to be a complete and successful integration, that is all that really is what our client is looking at here. I think we could go to a 30%, and Christina can talk a little bit more about that.
Right. I think like we discussed earlier, we're not looking at this to become a I own it, no you own it discussion.
Right.
That's not the intention here, but there is some recognition that should go to our client in regards to the old protocols being made with company resources. And we're looking at a 30% gross profit to KPF. And specifically, like for your client who does believe in the cause of KPF, that money does go directly back to the organization and the work that it does. This is not our client attempting to
Right.
keep that money, but it's going back to the greater cause. And I think lastly, publicity is very important to our clients, so we want the opportunity. To be able to speak about that. We're looking at a publicity campaign for our client regarding the cryptols and the success that it's had in the developing countries. And so with this launch of the new encryption system that we look to your client to support and install, we'd like to have him on that campaign with us. You indicated that recognition and reputation is important to your client, so we'd like to provide him that opportunity to be seen worldwide as the great mathematician that he is and the work that he's done with his publication.
Okay, so you went down, I think, from that larger number to that 30% there, and we didn't discuss that too much. Can you kind of explain again, now why is that 30% what you feel to be appropriate?
Yeah, as I discussed earlier, it's the fact that our client also finds that she has some ownership stake in
Right.
the old protocols and is willing to transfer that ownership, but wants the recognition for who the old protocols used to belong to. And now, as we stated, the gross profits would go directly to the cause that your client has indicated that he supports.
And how long would this worldwide tour for PR take?
This surrounds the launch of the new encryption system. And it will also include with the launch of the publication as well. So we see it spanning within that time frame.
That would be our client. He's a career as a mathematician. He'd be doing the integration, and now a worldwide tour for the PR.
It's not a worldwide tour. We sorry, just to qualify, because
Yeah.
I don't want it to run onto a tangent. It's a opportunity to have a publicity campaign in the area that our clients currently live in, just to provide the launch behind the systems.
Okay, so with that in mind and listening to some of this rationale, we would be willing to, understanding the 6 times was viable for your client, go to 4 times that amount. In regards to that 30%, that's really outside of our authority. It's not something that is, we're kind of spinning our wheels talking in numbers this large. Our client would be willing, instead of this 30%, to do 5% of the gross profits going to KPF. And then as to this PR capacity, some of our concern surrounding this is that it's going to eat up a lot of his time. So no more than 5%. of his time per month. So if you want to quantify that in hours, probably like around around maybe 30 hours might be easier to work in.
Then 5%. And then that would be also, we would agree to stay on until the integration is successful, not just complete, and doing this publicity.
Right, so we've definitely heard you on kind of having, money is pretty important in monetary recognition for your client. I'm wondering what it is that what he needs this money for. It seems like he feels pretty strongly against, sharing any of the profits. Is there anything in particular he needs all this money for, and having a much higher salary? Is there a need there that he needs behind this?
We haven't been provided with any information about what he'd use this money towards, but again, that's within his personal finances, and it's really, not something we have information about. All we've been provided with is, he really wouldn't like to be paid in cryptos. He'd much prefer to be paid in US dollars, and if he is to be paid in cryptos, it would really need to be at a higher rate, the 4% there, 4 times that we've listed there.
Looking at the point of integration, I realize, we've been saying install and you're saying integration.
Right.
Does your client see a mnemonic difference between those two words?
Certainly not.
Okay,
Same thing.
so we both view install and integrate
Right,
as the same.
right.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, certainly.
And then, I think, again, just to reemphasize for our client, any money spent on this is money that doesn't go to this cause that she's been working on. So it's just important when we go back to her, for her to really understand what it is that he needs here, what it is that he is, accomplishing with this, and sort of why he's taking these positions he's taking. I think this is so a lot higher than she was really feeling comfortable paying him.
And
so I think it would be really good for her to know just where he's coming from.
Well, Mr. Hart really does believe in the mission of the Cryptols, and with that in mind, when he left, he knew this issue could come up, and that is why he continued to develop those new security mechanisms and the new protocols, which is why today we don't have to waste time negotiating the design of those new protocols, why we can begin right away with that integration, because he believes in that message, and we can deliver today those new protocols which go up. But Mr. Hart, he still has to put food on his table, and if he's going to be paid in cryptodollars, he does need to have that kind of compensation. And recognizing what this would do for the charity, he is willing to take time out of his busy schedule to go on this PR tour. He is willing to delay publication to make sure there is a complete integration. So I really feel that Mr. Hart is working with your client to make sure that our needs of recognition and finance are being met as well as your client's needs of really getting the word out about cryptodollars.
And the cap really seems to be something important to your client, and as we established, the cap doesn't really get to exist anymore without these new protocols. And as far as we've been able to ascertain, our client is the only one that can provide these new protocols to your client. So again, that's sort of some of the underlying drive for this offer.
So it sounds like your client wants to make sure that at the end of today, he still has a positive relationship with our client, because, as you've stated so well, is that he does believe in the mission of KPF. Is that right?
That's
just want to make
certainly,
sure
we're
it's
all on the
also
same page.
recognized.
Yes,
That's
we'd
great.
like to move forward.
And I think we're making progress here, which
Great.
is fantastic, and I see us, possibly reaching a deal today. That said, I think we have something else we'd like to propose today.
And I think, we definitely, it sounds like he really wants recognition for the work. And I think us being at the table today, hopefully emphasizes that our client really does recognize the work that he's done and really values what he's been able to contribute for this foundation. And it's just, I think you guys can understand, this is not an organization with lots of extra money to be given out. And especially, given that it turns out that the old encryption that, that this company had spent time and resources on is now no longer viable. So it is going to be important, for our client to be able to have something financially sound, as we mentioned. So, with that in mind, we would be willing to meet your client at 2.5 times the salary. That is high for our client, but she does recognize the value that he brings. And Christina can talk a little bit to the ownership of the protocols.
And then the entirety of the offer, I think we're agreeing on the publication of the proof after the successful integration. We will agree on integrating the new protocol, the recognition to design, press releases, lead tech designer. The old protocols of the 5% is something our client can be amenable to. I think, in regards to salary versus the gross profits, I think she's willing to take a smaller share of the gross profits and meet you at the 5%. And then the public relations capacity, we appreciate your client's willingness to offer the 30 hours and doing that surrounding the launch. So there's definitely places where we agree. I think now where the conversation's going to go is stemming on the 2.5 times the cryptols and the 5% of, or we agree on the 5%. So
Certainly.
we're really looking at that salary piece,
So-
the compensation piece there.
With all of these things in mind, we'd be able to come to a deal today should you be able to do that 3.5% or times 3.5
3.5 times instead of 2.5 times, and then we'd be able to reach a deal on every other provision.
Because I think everything else on here looks like it makes sense for our client. It's just that 2.5 times still isn't within our authority to agree to today.
So he still sees that his work is that much more valuable.
That's
than
correct.
2.5 times. I think, for our client, this is a stretch of her budget, but I think, it is important that your client's work is recognized. And if you're saying that 2.5 times isn't something that would work for your client,
That's correct.
our client could go up to 3 times. I think we'd like to see that reflected a little bit more, though, again, in terms of resources for this company, in a percentage that is higher. And so maybe starting at 10% of those profits, moving down to 5% after that first year, so that this company can recuperate some of the money that it's being spent on the new encryptions.
So are you not authorized today, or is it not possible today to come to an agreement at that 3.5 times?
We're not authorized today to do the 3.5 times.
Okay.
We can do the 3 times. I think Abby's putting up there just to reemphasize for the old protocols, a shift in 10% from the first year of release to down to 5% after that, after the first year.
And as to you mentioned initially that 10 to 5 had something to do with this year being important for some reason. Can you provide background?
Correct.
I think, this, as you know, this is a company that devotes itself entirely to being able to provide this currency to developing countries. So really anything that's spent is something that doesn't go to that exact purpose. And so, what our client is looking at is the fact that she's going to be, losing, the effort that went in onto the old protocols. And so with that 10% and being able to recover at least some funds that are now going to a new system, a brand new system that she's funding your client to be able to provide, that's something that gives more security to this company. And I think, again, your client has expressed how much he does care about this company. So I think being able to share that and recognize the work that his coworkers put into this old system too. He didn't do that alone. It seems like, there was a team effort involved. And
So just
that
in the
10%
interest of time,
recognizes that.
right. In the interest of time and throwing out another offer, we'd be willing to agree to that 3 times if you were able to do 7% in the first year, dropping down to 5% in all the subsequent years.
What are your client's concerns about the 10%?
Our client just feels like that 10% doesn't correctly compensate him for all of his work that's going to go into these new protocols, considering he came to the table today having created those. Understanding that we're under some time constraints now, would that 7% to 5% be something your client would be willing and able to agree to?
So, and then within that, we have 30 hours.
That is correct.
Devoted
That's
to the PR.
Is that 30 hours per month? I'm sorry, I remember it was 5% of time of the month.
Yeah, 5% we thought would be a little
Okay,
too
great.
easy, so
Yes.
it would be 30
Correct.
hours.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
And 7 sort of meets.
I'm sorry. I think my understanding was 30% or 30 hours overall.
Oh,
If you're
I
looking for
apologize.
something per month, we go to 10 hours per month.
I see.
I don't think that it's the per month. We just wanted
We just
to
wanted
know.
the total
Okay.
holistically, what it was.
Yeah, and I think, is there something about that 10% that just really reflects, that's too much effort given to this foundation here for him?
Does your client need 10% to reach a deal today?
I just think, overall we want something that makes her feel as though that this is, a good, something that can help this company moving forward. I think if this is something that is absolute for you, that the 7%, the 10% is just not doable, I don't think that would get in the way of our client being able to come up with a big picture, but, I think that it's just a little bit tough for us to understand when we go back to her, what are the reasons behind your client's positions here?
If you'd be willing to do 8%, I think we could reach a deal here today. Would that be something?
That's certainly, we appreciate that movement there. Our client would be open to the 8% in the first year of transfer and then 5% every year
So
thereafter.
fantastic. We will hold off on publishing the proof until successful integration. You will receive the new protocol, which we will integrate at a fee of 3 times our normal rate paid in Cryptals. You'll get recognition to the design. There will be press releases indicating us as the lead tech designer. We will have outright ownership in both protocols, but in the first year, any profits we generate, 8% will go to your charity and 5% in every subsequent year. And we will go on a tour about the success of Cryptals, including in publication for a total of
30 hours.
30 hours total time.
That's fantastic. Yes, great.
And thank you so much.
Thank you
I
very
think
much.
this is something
Thank
that'll
you.
help
Our
us
client will be
continue.
So let's have the paralegals type this up, and let's be back here tomorrow to sign.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Natalie.
It would be helpful if you would tell us at least your first name.
Yeah, I'm Natalie, and that's Adam.
Emily,
Yeah. And the ABA wants us to address 2 things today. The first is what we do the same and what we do differently if we encountered the situation tomorrow. And then the second is how well our strategy worked in relation to our outcome. So Adam's first going to begin to address some of the things we do the same if we encountered the same situation.
Something we feel that we try to focus on in negotiations such as this is really finding commonality with the other side and engaging in a needs and interests discussion, as well as emphasizing the point of our clients. Being someone who is trying to sell property and work with a beleaguered nonprofit, it can be very easy for us to come off as if we're just trying to get too much from them, which is why it's very important for us in these negotiations here today to emphasize that Mr. Hart really does believe in KPF's mission. Prior to him leaving, he was number 2 going in with a lot of these things. And with that in mind, in expressing our commonality interest, how we want to help, how we're able to go that extra mile to make sure that we can work together, while at the same time emphasizing what is important to our client, making sure he gets the recognition he deserves, making sure he gets fair payments. We could do both, recognize their needs for making sure that their charity can proceed as planned. We can recognize our needs for recognition and financial security, and really know that we want to work together in order to reach a creative outcome that benefits both parties.
And again, another thing that we always seek to do throughout these negotiations is ask questions, because occasionally there'll be things within the confidential information that really surprise us. And I think that mimics real life in a way where you never exactly know what the other side is thinking about a particular issue until you're able to suss it out. So what we always tried to bring it back to is, why does this make sense for your client? Why are you proposing this? And how is this really driving your client's needs forward? So again, throughout the negotiation, we asked a lot of questions, and I think we were able to gather a lot of information that helped us make a more targeted offer when we came back and made sure we weren't offering things that were in excess of what they needed. We also always try to figure out where their authority is, where it lies. If we know they can't offer US dollars, we're not going to come back and tell them to pay us in US dollars, right? A lot of what happens when you're not able to ascertain what they're able to offer is you end up sort of backtrotting and trying to discuss things that aren't even on the table to begin with for them. Something we might do differently if we encountered the situation tomorrow is there was a little bit of confusion regarding that last PR term. We wanted to find a way to limit that because we saw this as a potential to, yes, it helps our client in a way. He really wants his name to be known. He wants to get out there and be known for implementing this new software, but we wanted to make sure that he wasn't overly committing where this was going to be something all the time. So there was a little confusion surrounding that, and if we encountered the same situation tomorrow, we'd like to, change that a bit.
When we begun strategizing this problem, something that we soon realized is that there's a lot that our client is looking for in these negotiations, and it might not necessarily give us a whole lot of wiggle room to get it. So something we realized early is we are going to need to be setting anchoring points very high in some issues so we can use them as leverage further down the road. So for example, as we were able to learn from our questioning and active listening that US dollars weren't on the table, we know we'd have to go very high with Cryptals. And once we were able to go very high with Cryptals, that gave us more leverage in negotiations for what percentage of the profits derived from the old protocols going forward would be given out. And also by asking those questions, by making sure we're doing targeted offers, and then using where we do have some wiggle room to provide leverage to other areas, we're able to make an outcome that was very successful for our client. In terms of getting the finances, we're able to get a percentage of the old protocols that would be very agreeable to him. We're able to get him the amount of money in cryptols which he was seeking for his consultations, as well as not only recognition for designing the new and old protocols, but he's going to be brought all over the world on tour to talk about the developments he's made, and also he's able to publish his article. And by saying where we have wiggle room, how much we'd be giving up to comply with the demands of the other side, and using those to leverage a better situation for our client, we're able to make an outcome that I would feel very proud presenting to my client after these negotiations.
And again, yeah, we came into this understanding this was a complicated problem, and it would have been easy to sort of get trapped up in all this technological talk. So something we played around with is, should we try to come in here and go through all of the different ways this technology worked? And when we were practicing, we realized that really sidetracks the whole discussion, because that's not something any of us are really able to control during this negotiation itself, especially in terms of, how the Iris technology software works with these other elements. Every time we went to discuss those, it seemed to lead us down a rabbit hole. So what we tried to do today is really stay focused on what we did have control over, and initially get them to admit that, listen, not having this cap really isn't an option. So their option today was to try to work with us. And we used that, I think, to the benefit of our client today. Do you have any questions regarding what we did or points of discussion?
How did you feel when the opposite team got up and tore off your sheet?
So sad. No, I'm kidding. I knew that we could, in terms of the agenda, is that correct? I had the agenda written down, and I was sort of mentally following through. And oftentimes we find when an offer is up on the board, that sort of acts as the new de facto agenda. So we get excited when the other team puts up the first offer, because we know exactly the priority and what they want out of that offer. So once we understood what was important to them, the subsidiary concerns, we had our concerns in mind, but all those other concerns sort of fell away because they were able to really tell us on that offer what was important.
By changing what was,
So in the end, you used that as a positive.
Yeah, that's
Because
correct.
often in a courtroom setting or something, it would be very distressing.
In the limited time we have, to make a big deal over it, I mean, we could have tried to get that agenda back up, but we felt it was more important to really move forward, be focusing on the future. And then we got very excited, as Natalie said, when they started writing out the terms of their offer, because when another side lets their offer be known, they're really tipping their hand to what they're looking for, where they're looking to get it, and where they are in the negotiation. And based on what we glean from our listening, what we know from our confidential information, when they tell us what they're looking for, we can make sure we're not going to waste any time on superfluous things. We are not going to offer them things they're not looking for. We're not going to ask them about things that aren't important to them. And we know now what information we really could keep close to our vest, which allows us, when we took our break and came back with our offer, we knew exactly where to go, exactly what to give them, and exactly where to go from there.
Once you were able to determine what they said were their limits of their authority, did you ever consider asking them to go to their client and consider something else that was more favorable to your side? Just like it was assumed you had the authority to do anything that was in the best interest of your client, did you ever consider, suggesting, can we take a break, and are you willing to ask your client if they can do X rather than Y?
Right. So in the interest of coming to a conclusion within these 50 minutes, it's not normally an approach that we take. In the confidential information, the parameters of our authority are pretty positive. So I think usually in these negotiations, we take those to actually be their parameters, but in real life, that's certainly something that I'd likely ask them to do. US dollars are really important to our client. Would you mind stepping out and asking about it? But today, the purpose of placing a fictional phone call didn't seem to be in the interest of best time.
And also getting in the role of an advocate who really does, for a client who really does care about the mission of the charity. As our client says multiple times in their information, if I figure this out, anyone can figure this out any day now. So time really was of the essence to the charity. We need to get the new protocols installed as quickly as possible. We need to prevent that counterfeit software, because if we don't reach a deal, the more time that passes, the greater the chance that a lot of people in the developed world will be given a great disservice when the currency they rely on to keep them away from these corrupt governments suddenly is no longer viable.
Any other questions?
I think we probably use it 10 minutes.
Why did you choose the strategy of trying to get all of the issues that you wanted resolved agreed to at sort of in one big package at the same time versus trying to pick off individual issues and getting that one out of the way and then only having two left and then getting two out of the way and having only 3 and 4 left?
Right.
Just curious.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And what
Certainly.
your thought was about that, because you seem to, want this whole package.
Right.
And they seem to do that too. Just curious why you chose to do that as opposed to maybe picking off one
Little
issue
bits.
at a time.
Right. Our concern with doing that, and something that's happened to us in the past, is we put a little check mark next to something. We're like, all right, we've agreed to this, and then we move on to the next thing, and suddenly they're saying they're only going to pay us one time in cryptos. So then to go back to that check mark, I think really feels like you're taking a lot of something you already agreed to back. So our strategy is normally to see these things as interchangeable parts.
Yeah, the more moving parts we have, the more freedom we have. So if we're holed up on what percentage of the old protocol derived profits will be given to KPF, and we're really at a log jam over the percentages, well, we can fiddle with what the consulting fee will be, or we can fiddle to what the PR commitment will be from our client. And we have more parts to work with. We can give in areas where we have more authority to make sure we get the best deal possible for our client in an area where we don't have so much authority.
But you do recognize that sometimes it's better than the others.
Oh,
Oh,
certainly.
absolutely,
Just to,
absolutely.
Yeah.
kind of narrow and narrow and narrow, and then it doesn't seem like such a big
Big thing.
thing that you have disagreements on. That,
Yeah.
you're never going to be. I mean, you obviously reached a conclusion at the
Right.
end, but
Right.
barely.
And other problems we practiced, and we've gone point by point, and just in practicing for this one, because there were so many numbers involved, we saw the interchangeable as being the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes the
Right,
doing
certainly.
the whole package is, as you say, you can see, okay,
Right,
you
right.
do want the whole package to be discussed at the same time, and other times.
Yeah,
not, so you
certainly.
recognize.
Correct.
Right, it's a
absolutely.
strategic point, yeah.
So when you were preparing for this, did you think about the PR problem at all?
No, that was actually something, we had kind of considered that might be something they were wanting, but not as strongly as they wanted it. And so I think we kind of discussed that if that came up, it was going to be something we'd need to sort of limit down, so it wouldn't be, they were expecting 100 hours a month out of our client, right? But in terms of that being as important to them as it was, that's something that we didn't anticipate. And once we did find out that was important, I think we played on that well and incorporated it into our offer.
Did you have?
Okay.
That's probably.
I would think so.
But-
Yeah, we're probably.
Yeah, so we probably should.
And we have
Okay,
another
certainly.
thing.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we would like to know your first names.
Oh, sure. No problem.
I'm Abby.
Abby,
Yes. And I'm Christina.
Christina.
Yes.
So you're supposed to start by
Okay.
telling us what you would do the same.
Oh yes, of course, yes. Yeah, making the rounds. So today for our self-analysis, we're asked 2 questions today. The first being, what was our strategy coming into this round, and how do we think that strategy affected our outcome? And another being that if we were to do this round over again, what are some things that we would do the same, and what are some things that we would do differently? So as for the strategy point, I think we came into this round wanting to make sure we knew exactly who our client is and what her underlying interests are. So for our client, she holds this project as her brainchild. It is something that is of incredible importance to her, that she spent her life devoted to. And so we wanted to make it clear that her interests were in the security of the encryptions and in control with the use of the transfer cap, and being financially responsible for this organization, because the more money that comes into this organization, the more money that's going to be distributed to the developing countries that she works in. So for our goals today, we were able to make it clear that we were keeping the cap in place. That was a non-negotiable for our client, as well as get the new encryptions such that the cryptols could continue to be used. And as well as have publicity surrounding the cryptols and the success of them in these developing countries, such that it can be successful across many more in the future.
And then so, with that in mind, with her interests and her goals in mind, I think, for us it was really important to emphasize the interests behind everything and not just simply the positions. I mean, I think ultimately what we're here for in any negotiation, really, what you're doing is you're harmonizing two sides that might have different perspectives, different information, different goals, and different problems with what we might be facing. And so harmonizing those two things, it's really important to get behind, what is the interest underlying everything. Obviously money is something everybody wants, but it's important to know why, and it's important, for there to be principled reasons behind all that. And we really wanted to emphasize that today because, otherwise it would simply be just, us asking for money and pushing numbers and asking for money and pushing numbers. And we wanted to emphasize, not only our clients' interest, but the shared interest. That was something that, we came into this round, thinking that here we have this positive opportunity. We've got this company that, Mr. Hart worked for and really cared about. And presumably still does care about. And so, the interests of the company are also in his interest, in addition to him being compensated for the work he's done. So, first we really wanted to emphasize our interests and emphasize the interest between, the different positions that came out, and then also emphasize the overlapping interests we had. And then finally, we wanted to be able to adapt to whatever was a priority for Mr. Hart, knowing that we knew that we had to pay him in cryptols. That was non-negotiable. The cap was non-negotiable. And knowing that we really wanted to have publicity, we wanted to be able to adapt to what was most important to him and also be able to take back to our client what it was that was going to be most important to him and justify whatever it was that we'd be able to bring back to her today.
So I think in considering those interests of financial responsibility, security control, and using those strategies, at least highlighting certain parts of our offer that we find that we're excited about. The integration of the new protocols is incredibly successful. Our client was willing to just have him consult and use our people power to install them. However, with him being the one to install it, it helped warrant the 3 times the compensation because she was willing to pay him 3 times to just consult it, but now we're having him actually install the encryptions and not having to use our own resources to do that. And I think
Curious, why at that point did you just not say, well, there was probably a strategy to this, but I think one of the things that was something about you knew your own people knew how to install it. So in order to get them to realize, hey, this guy's not as valuable and we shouldn't have to pay X times, were you unwilling to release information such as that? Was there a strategy?
I think for us, since security was of the utmost importance, I think having this man that was actually the one to create these encryptions, we knew that would actually be, our top priority here, even if it was going to come at a bit of a premium. Since it seemed like they weren't asking for more, given that he was going to be the one actually doing the installing, it seemed at that time that it wouldn't really serve our interest to try to make that distinction. And I think, where we tried to talk about sort of the value that we were paying him, I think, we tried to emphasize instead that this was something that, he'd been paid for to do work previously and he's being paid to work for us again.
How would he use the crypto which has the caps on it? It's not really used in the country where he's living or practicing or teaching. How would he use it if it's with the cap?
I think for our client, the use of paying him in the cryptos was a symbolic gesture. It was an opportunity to show that this esteemed mathematician who's worked on this proof is now going to be the one who's using and happily receiving these cryptos. So it's a big push on the publicity front for our client, and we're glad that we were able to secure that.
So it
today.
has really no economic value.
It was very much a hard line that we were given in our facts that it would be paid in cryptols, and I think for our client it's not an economic choice, it's really just a matter of PR. And
So
PR
then it
was
really
big
didn't
for
matter
her.
how much you got.
Oh,
Did you
when
ever
you-
consider out of the box offering to re-employ him?
Well, I think, for our client, that wasn't something that she really prepared us to talk about. I think that's a big step. I think that is something that, it would make sense for her to consider. It's just not something that we were given. And so we thought about that, but it seems like, it would be a little bit risky to offer employment if that's not something
Right.
she could ask
And if
for.
her concern is, financial responsibility, we don't know what salary we'd be able to offer for him today in regards to employment. I think it was important to be able to have him paid for this one-time use of this encryption, for his new encryption, and that cost is done now. And now our client can continue to operate financially responsibly for her company.
Yeah.
But I think in regards to your question, I think with any cryptol that's released from the company, that still comes at a cost to the company. Whether it's 3 times, 6 times, 1.5 times, the lowest amount that we could offer, I think that's less cryptols that our company's going to have to try and monitor with the cap.
But he can't really spend it, right?
He can exchange the cryptols, and they talked about how that just takes time and effort for him to do that exchange. But cryptols are based on currency, so it is a cost to our company. It's not just us generating this currency. And so I think going to the second question of what we do the same and what we do differently, I think, we mentioned that control was important, and we mentioned that, having everything be justified in an interest for us to be able to go back to our client. I think we would do that the same. I think, we really made sure that, everything that they proposed was sort of justified in the sense that, wasn't just a raw number and a haggle, that it really was based on an underlying interest that we could then explain to our client. I think Christina did a really good job of, asking about, particular percentages, why that would be an important thing. And I think even from the beginning about, publication, she, made sure to really ask why that was important.
Something we do differently approaching the round is, unfortunately we weren't able to build as much rapport with the other side as we would have liked to. I think for us it was more about, what are these underlying interests behind the reason for this specific number. But, perhaps for the other side it really was just a matter of compensation. And I think we could have done a better job at recognizing that sometimes it might just be about money for the other side. And
What questions or what would you have said that could have built better rapport with the other side? And you're saying that you felt that there was a little bit lacking there. What would you have said differently?
I think we could have emphasized our gives a little bit more. I think, we're hearing that the salary is important to you, and earlier you've noticed that you've mentioned that it's recognition and it's compensation. Like, we can provide you this compensation here, and we're also willing to give you this recognition that you're asking for to be the lead tech designer. I think when it became a number game at some point in the negotiation, a lot of the gives to meet their interests weren't clear.
And I think establishing rapport at the very beginning, it seemed clear that they really wanted to get to an agenda and move quickly, which I think, there's a lot to talk about, but I think if we had, what we did, I think we do the same is, convoluting the two questions, I guess, is what we did was to say, look, we actually do want to step back and talk about the bigger picture here. What I would have done differently is also explain why.
And why?
Explain why. I think that we would have said, what we're trying to do today, no matter what we come up with, we want to make sure we know your interests, and we want to make sure that we come out of this feeling positively. And so I think if we had explained that and not just said we want to take a step back, we could have explained why we wanted to step back and talk about interests. I think that would have helped, and it would have helped kind of set that pace as well.
But why is it important? My question was, why is it important to make clear the interests of your party and or acknowledge their interests as far as building this rapport?
I think because if we're really doing right by our client, we want to preserve value for her. I mean, this is a charitable company, and we kind of kept coming back to that. But any money that we expend on this is money that doesn't go to the things that she's passionate about. So if there's a reason for us going, and we did wind up at our bottom line, if we come back to our client with this, and we would want to be able to say why we had to go to our bottom line, and not just because it seemed, that they, that was where we were pushed to, but to say we needed to go to our bottom line because that was the only way to make Mr. Hart feel like he was valued for the work he was doing. We were only able to get that small percentage because he felt that it was reflected in the fact that he had put those resources in. I think that's why the interests behind everything are so important, and to go back to our client with. I think ultimately we did get great value because she was willing to not take any percentage, and we wound up with 8% at the start and then 5% at the beginning, after the second year. And then, we were able to waive on that proof so that the system would be secure. We were at three times the salary, but we also were in cryptols, and we were able to generate positive PR through his mentioning in the publication and 30 hours of public relations for us.
We're more than happy to answer any other questions you all might have.
Why did you choose to put the PR capacity into your negotiation strategy?
So, you know, when we looked at where she was coming from with the cryptols, and we looked at where she was coming from with, you know, just generally wanting to assuage any concerns about safety, it seemed clear a lot in our facts that she was really concerned about the perception of this currency. I think this company is only as strong as people's perception of this as being something valuable. And so given that he was going to publicize this proof that would actually show that there were all these weaknesses in the system, it was equally important for her, along with that proof, to have assurances to the public that this is something that is safe, this is something you can use for your business. And so the PR piece was really important for her going in today, and it was pretty clear from our reading of the facts that that would be a way that we could get value for her.
And specifically, it's...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and specifically it's a PR piece with him, right? So he's the one who has this conjecture out there that might be testing the security of our work, of our cryptols. And now to engage in this publicity campaign with this gentleman who's now, you know, found the loophole but can fix it, like, I think that shows, no, we're stronger than ever as an organization. And it's something that we saw as an underlying interest that might not have been explicit for our client but can give her great benefits in the end. And that's what we were here today to do.
Are there any other questions you think you could have, you know, using it as a discovery technique,
Okay.
and a discovery session? Can you think of any other questions you might have asked that you didn't ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we definitely would have wanted to ask about they asked us about our plans with the old protocol. They asked us a lot of questions at the beginning. And then, you know, we only then slowly started to come back with our own questions. And then one thing that we could have and should have asked is, what are their plans with the old protocols? And I think we tried to get at that with the what it is about the percentages that they took issue with, but we could have directly asked, do they have any plans to sell it? Do they have any plans to license it, you know, direct plans that they know of?
That would have been useful information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Were there any surprises? One of the questions they asked us is if there's deviation or new information or unforeseen moves. Did you sense any of that? We didn't, I guess I could.
From the other party,
In other words, everybody stuck to the problem.
yeah, I'd say so. I mean,
They might have been surprised at our PR moves. I think that's why we wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be something overly burdensome. I was surprised at how much of a hard line and about the salary that would be. I was surprised that it would be of such a big deal to be paid in cryptols, given that we were only given authority to have them be paid in cryptols. So I was surprised that it was, you know, 6 times and even 4 times was what they were looking for, given kind of what we were given in terms of numbers, and that we were actually only allowed to pay them in cryptols.
it
But
sounds like they had another timeline for dollars,
Right.
which we didn't have authority
Right.
for at all. Yeah.
right, but I think in terms of, you know, proposals and possible things to talk about, nothing was beyond the parameters of what we were talking about today.
Well, thank you
I
very
think
much.
it's
I
been
think
10
we need
minutes,
to
so-
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. I was going to ask your team, what was your understanding of how Mr. Hart could use his cryptos?
From the consultation fee?
Yeah, you know, the 3 times that was ultimately agreed upon.
Oh, really?
Go ahead.
Well, really, it's just open to whatever he needs. As far as we're able to understand, it is pretty standard that if you're going to get a consultant, they are going to be paid. And if they are going to be paid, if there's an issue of currency, I mean, obviously a real US dollar currency would be more reliable than some form of cryptocurrency, especially one that is developed for use in the third world. So whatever he would use those funds for, whether it be developments of what he plans to do with the old protocols, whether it be to funnel his math research, that option would really be up to him.
But once we understood that there was under no circumstances could they agree to US dollars, which they told to us, the cryptos were really the only other way for him to receive payment throughout this negotiation.
I think your question was different, wasn't it?
Yeah,
He gets the cryptos. What can he do with them?
What can he do with them?
In
Yeah.
today's world.
The imagination is the only boundary. Is like
What economic value, I mean, other than symbolic, that he's locked in and he's got.
Well, e-currencies are kind of strong now, so I know some people my age are starting to deal in e-currencies,
Is it
invest
like
them in different
Bitcoins?
things.
Yeah,
like
that's how we
Bitcoins.
interpret it. Bitcoins or Dogecoins, although you can use them as their own medium to buy, they do have a dollar value if you wanted to sell them on a currency market.
But how does the cap affect his? Because you can only, my understanding of the cap is that you can only spend so many cryptos in any one day. Can they be, how can he, and it's a meager amount.
Well, realizing that there is a cap and realizing the present value of money, that is why we would need such a substantially higher amount of our fee. A 300% increase in our fee is what we ended up agreeing to, where if it was US dollars, we can say, okay, straight up fee or a small increase in fee. But because there is that data cap, because it is a cryptocurrency, 300% increase in our consultation fee was to offset those fears, and that is something that our client indicated to us in our parameters he was looking for.
Yeah, I think our client told us the cryptos would be fine at 300%, so whatever he wants to do with those cryptos is good with us.
I mean, this is sort of beside the point, but it's,
Right,
it's
right.
an interesting matter to
Oh,
contemplate.
certainly.
Right.
Aren't we really supposed to be concentrating on giving them feedback though?
Okay.
About
Yeah.
stuff on
Right,
limits
right.
rather than something substantive like that.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
so-
thought you made a really good use of the easel, and you look at the different colors and how things are checked off and how you cancel one thing when you negotiated to a different aspect on that. I think that was helpful for both of you. And I also think we saw a nice amount of passion, which is good. And you seem to get along very well together, and nobody got upset with anybody else. You smiled once in a while, and that's good stuff.
Thank you.
I guess my turn. You know that there are various categories that we're supposed to think about in evaluating your performance in this negotiation process, and I think both sides clearly had prepared as far as being knowledgeable about the facts of the case. And because of that, which is a hope, you don't necessarily know that, but because of that, at least one of the things that I felt used a lot of time was, and it's good and bad. I mean, sometimes you need to clarify the facts to make sure the other side's on the same page as you are. But perhaps in this session, it might have been better to just assume they did and go, right to the issue of, okay, we'll do X if you'll trade us for this, and this is how much we need. Can you do it or not? Rather than, I think a little bit more time than I felt comfortable with was spent making sure the other side had the facts. I mean, that can cut both ways, but you certainly, each of you knew what the facts were. I think that one of the things that I would have liked to see is each side having a way to acknowledge the concerns of the other side a little more clearly. I think you were both very anxious to say what your concerns were, but not necessarily acknowledge the concerns of the other side and say that it's important and you understand that that's important and that's why you want X and that's why you're willing to give Y. I think that's important because it then establishes that rapport that you need to encourage closure and encourage compromise. Go ahead, and then I'll think of other things to say.
Well, thank you very much for preparing so well. I was impressed with your performance, both sides. Overall, I think you both understand the mechanism of negotiation, which is you have to give and you have to take. The thing that I found very interesting from your dynamic is that the important parts of the deal, which is the publication and then integration of the new protocol, I think that you just seem to agree to right away. And I think what's happening over there is that you both recognize what's important, so you ended up fighting over the less important parts. And I was just sitting there like, oh, well, why can't I just get to that? But the other thing that I don't like about this situation is that the way the facts are written in some way just cancel out certain things. And I don't think neither of the team recognize it, because one, the old protocol is transfer what is the actual value if there is also the publication of how wicked it is. And that's a point that I don't think that either of you recognize that could have been used to your advantage if you see that. But you know, I know you have very little time and you probably are not technology people. So that goes without saying. I'm very impressed with your ability to pull out a PR schedule, but your ability to counter that and handle that apparently was a surprise. But you handled that pretty well, and I was a bit worried about how you address certain things without knowing how you handle your client, your fictional client. But with the facts that you've given and the situation you're in, that's about the best you could do. So I like that. Overall, I think that you were both driven to just get to an agreement in that very little time for very big problems. So that's about the best you could do under the circumstances. The deal was probably acceptable to both your clients. I feel like you got a little bit of a better deal than I expected. So that's what I think.
Thank you.
I have one other comment.
Sure.
That's directed to Adam. I thought your summary was terrific. Instead of just saying, we're done, goodbye, you basically, while you were standing up, went through what you agreed. I thought that was very nice.
Thank you.
Very effective. Nobody disagreed with you.
I'd be anxious to hear from each of you whether or not you feel that what you ended up at the very end, sort of in the last minute agreeing to, luckily you did reach a conclusion, but do you feel that there was enough specificity and lack of ambiguity in the terms that you really knew what you were agreeing to?
I think these are interesting problems because they always bring up insanely complex topics that you're expected to deal with in 50 minutes. So I think in the real world, any sort of profit sharing would take months to probably hammer out in reality. And I think it's similar to a lot of those terms. I would expect in real life how this would go is maybe in 50 minutes we'd roughly sketch out something like this, and then we'd spend the next 3 months deciding exactly how we're going to execute that from my experience. So do you have something to add?
And given with the time limits we have and the parameters that were given to our client, we were able to get everything our client wanted and fitting well into the authority they gave us. So in terms of the specifics of the negotiation.
But you realize that
absolutely, absolutely.
The devil is in the
Oh,
details.
right.
And so you may think you have a deal, but then 2 sessions down the road as you're writing this up,
Right,
you
certainly.
realize that some of those
Absolutely.
details that you didn't discuss.
In terms of profit sharing, we can agree to 3 times the currency now, but 3 times the currency now could be a completely different amount a couple months down the road.
Right.
Publication dates of someone else publishing it, exactly.
Yeah, so the only thing I'm suggesting is that when you're doing your list of things you want them to agree to, it's good to be as specific as you possibly can be, so that you really are on the same page when you say, yes, I agree with this.
Certainly.
Right. And I think for us, in terms of the specificity we needed, and I think, we have specificity in terms of what our client needed with pay and with, being able to get some profit. In terms of a successful integration, I think the reason for wanting, a certain amount of months just to make sure it's successful would be a little bit more specific than just being able to say it is successful, whereas, one could say it's successful, but then possibly have other issues. So that would be something we'd want to, and realistically we would later reconvene and talk about, okay, well, what would that look like? How would we make sure that this is successful? What are the measures that we're going to be taking to test this system and make sure there are no holes in it? So I think that would be something that we need more details on. And then in terms of, we do have 30 hours in terms of PR, but, what exactly that PR would be, I think for us, it's great to know that no matter what, we have those 30 hours. I think realistically, what would wind up happening is we'd talk about what Mr. Hart would and wouldn't be willing to do in terms of how that would be, those hours would be spent. And then in terms of mentioning that in his publication, we really did just need a mention in that, or we were looking for a mention, of any sort that related his work to the company. But yes, I think there would be more specificity in some of the things.
I think our time is up, that we're supposed to.
So we congratulate
Thank
you
you
all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
Hi, I'm McKenna.
Mackenzie.
Chris
Hi,
Collins.
Katie Silcox. Nice to meet you.
Chris Collins.
Mackenzie,
Hi,
nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you so much for coming here today. As you know, we're here because long ago, Ella and Gabe started on this project to bring the Cryptaller to fruition, and we're here today because we've known for a while we've had some technological problems, and we'd like to patch those now. So we have a roadmap to get us where we're going, just to keep us on track. They all start with P's, so it's easy to remember. The first P is perfected protocols. We're really interested in how Gabe can help us perfect some of the issues that we're having with the algorithms right now. The second P is payment and how we're going to compensate Gabe for those services. And the third P is publication and the timeline in which he's going to release some of the information that he's been working on.
And along those lines, I actually have a question. Do you know if Gabe has actually perfected the row alpha conjecture yet?
Yeah, then let's actually start by telling you a little bit about kind of Gabe and our client Gabriel and where he's at. So as you mentioned, Ella and Gabriel have held each other in the highest regard. Personally and professionally, they've had a long relationship that started with a mutual love of math and turned into a currency. And now Gabriel's returned to his love of math. He has a fabulous position at the very prestigious Center for Advanced Mathematical Studies.
Very impressive.
And the currency in this new world that he's operating in is the constant innovation and production of brilliant ideas. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to him that he is able to share his ideas and he receives credit for his ideas, but he also still really believes in KPF's mission. So he's hopeful today that we can find an agreement that puts Ella and Gabriel back on the same page and meets those core interests.
It sounds like we're speaking the same language. We have
Absolutely.
the same interests. Just the answer to the question, has he actually perfected it yet?
Absolutely, and we were going to get to that. So just before we proceed any further, can we agree that today all discussions are confidential?
Absolutely.
And everything we share is good?
I think that, of course, would be in our mutual best interest.
That'd be fantastic.
Absolutely.
So would you like to explain to them?
Yeah,
So we have
so
some
we-
exciting information.
Yeah, we have two big pieces of new information. The first, which you may have predicted, is that Gabriel has already solved the proof.
Okay.
So we know that creates a little bit of a problem for KPF, but luckily that problem is solved by the second piece of exciting information, which is that he has created a new protocol. And this new protocol is protected from the security threats that went along with the old proof and allows the cap to remain in place.
Okay,
So
and
this
just so I understand, when you said that he's perfected the proof, he solved it, the proof, you mean the row alpha protocol, right?
That's the
Not the
first,
beta or the
yeah.
gamma, the first stage.
So just to clarify language, not to call it the row alpha protocol. So I think we should distinguish between the row alpha proof and the new protocol.
Okay.
So those are two separate things. The row alpha proof would be exploring that's a proof to the row alpha conjecture he published earlier that started this conversation. And then also the protocols are the new pieces of technology that will replace the old encryption system that will protect Cryptaller in the future, hopefully.
Gotcha. So that's what
from
we were
problems.
referring to as perfected protocols.
Yes, this would be a perfected protocol.
Gotcha.
And
he's already done that.
he has discovered that right now that is not vulnerable to the row vulnerability. So we agree, and we think this is a good framework. And so we're hoping today to discuss what this new protocol could be in an agreement. I think this lays out a pretty good idea of the agenda. One more thing, if you don't mind, to add to this. It's going to ruin your piece.
Yeah, no problem.
But it begins with a D.
I think we'll be
It
okay.
is
If it advances the
design
mission,
credit.
we're fine.
Design credit for this, as Mackenzie said, there's a currency of new ideas is important to him and getting recognition for that. So I think this would be a general framework in which we can discuss how that new protocol could change hands and really advance the Foundation's mission.
I think that all sounds fantastic. Mackenzie, I did want to follow up on something that you had said about how he's currently working in the field of producing new ideas. He's working at the Institute, and we understand he's a busy man. It's good to hear that he's already perfected this protocol, so it would be something that I assume would be up and runnable, like kind of a plug-and-play kind of technology. Is that correct?
Integration would take some time and work, and
Okay.
I think you already have a staff that can be helpful. He has the expertise in this, so if you would want to hire him as a consultant, that's something we could talk about, but there will be some integration.
And do you have a timetable, any kind of numbers there?
we wish we did. A lot of this stuff, it's difficult to figure out exactly the time when it's going to work, how fast it's going to, when we can get up and running. Hopefully we can reach an agreement today where we can hit the ground running right away, and he can oversee and give some direction to the computer guys to get this going.
Perfect.
But we don't have a timeline on what he expects. I think that also depends on how much staff is being able to be devoted to the seamless integration. That
Right.
hopefully
Now,
we can
and I
find.
understand he's a very busy man. Are there any additional things that are going to have to take away from his time that would distract him from assisting us in perfecting that?
What concerns did you have in mind?
Well, I know he's got the new position with the firm, and so has he got any kind of outside activities that would distract him? In other words, is there a specific timeline that would be more convenient for him? I mean, obviously time is of the essence here because we've got, now that it's been proven that it can be done, everybody's out there trying to do it, right? So we know that time is of the essence, but we also understand it may be that he has some pressing concern that we need to work around as well.
No, we appreciate you trying to see kind of what parameters we're working within. He doesn't have any sort of, I don't think there's anything that comes to mind that would directly address your concern.
So this would be like a top priority mission for him.
So I think his number one priority is his new professional career
Sure.
and making sure that that is advanced. So I think a couple of these, the design credit, the publication of the row alpha proof, those take precedent, and he would be involved as well with the integration efforts, but primarily that coding would need to take place from the computer guys.
But I hear you having a concern that maybe he wouldn't be able to give this the due attention that it deserves. And I think you understand that Gabriel and Ella have a really long-standing relationship. He's never let her down in the past. And so I think you can rest assured he's a man of his word. And if he committed to doing this, he would do it with, the utmost excellence and attention.
And likewise, we want to be sensitive to your guys' timing concerns. So when we hear that time is of the essence and we know that this is vulnerability, so could we hear a bit about your side and the difficulties?
Absolutely, Jeff. It's not so much that we have difficulties with the timeline. We just want to be respectful of your client's needs and kind of suss out where he is. It's good to hear you say that he's interested in maybe coming back as a consultant with the foundation. That's definitely something that we're interested in order to make sure that we get these perfected protocols integrated into our system as soon as possible. And ultimately, I think that's going to be in our mutual best interest, because not only does that benefit our client insofar as the sooner these protocols are integrated, the more secure her product is for these third world nations, the sooner we would feel comfortable with your client publishing some of the information that he's come up with since leaving the foundation.
And as you mentioned, they are old friends, and so Ella wants him to get as much credit as possible. She realizes the contribution that he's made to the foundation, so we're 100% on board with that.
We'd love to hear a little bit more about your client's top priorities coming into this negotiation. This has been helpful. Is there anything else that's really important that we know?
I guess there's one other question that we had, and that is the old protocols that had been developed. My understanding was in the offer that has been made already by your side, you were interested in getting possession of those. I just want to understand, has Gabe actually identified a specific value for those, or is it just generally so that he would have the ownership of them?
So we have no figures on what he values these at. He would look at taking those and stripping off the cap to see what market value they have.
But he hasn't identified any kind of specific value then?
He hasn't provided figures.
Yeah, we don't have any numbers, but he does have some ideas about how he thinks it might be useful in a different context.
So there is some value out there, we just don't know what it is.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm sorry.
But to return to my question, was there any other priorities that we need to know about?
No, I think as far as priorities, we're looking at a mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay.
So we want to
Sounds good.
protect the foundation, we want to give Gabe as much credit as possible, and we want to make the foundation successful so we can help kids and others in third world nations. That's really all this is about.
Okay, great.
And I just wanted to touch on one thing. You said he hadn't put a dollar figure on any other uses. I mean, are you aware of other uses? Like, even if you don't know what it's worth, do you know what other uses he may have discovered for these?
Yeah, so he is looking at using them in financial institutions. So not using it as a cryptocurrency, but in general currency.
Okay.
So he's looking to explore those markets with him.
And so in that situation, the cap, it really isn't an issue because they're not dealing in hundreds, they're dealing in millions potentially.
Exactly.
This would
Okay.
be for like applications on Wall Street and things like that. Okay. All right, great. Well, just to recap where we are right now, the last offer coming to the table today was from your side, and Gabe was willing to kind of integrate some of these new protocols into the Cryptaller app going forward, but he wanted to be paid a little bit more than we were comfortable with as a charitable foundation. You have to understand our funding is a little limited.
Yeah, and just to make sure you understand, we're not quibbling at all about his value. We understand
Yeah.
he has tremendous value. It's just we are a charitable foundation. We can't pay him what he's worth, and honestly, we never have. I mean, he turned down jobs at Silicon Valley and the NSA to come here in the first place. So I don't want him to be insulted feeling that we're not valuing his services highly enough. We're just limited on how much we can financially compensate him for those.
I think we understand your guys' financial constraints.
Okay. Well, then I think I'm actually in a position to give you an offer then.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so what we're willing to do here is to pay him 1.5 times what he was making when he was an employee here for his consulting. We would need to keep the old protocols as long as he is willing to work with us on putting in place these new protocols that he's already established. And then he could publish his proof immediately as soon as that's completed.
So just to clarify, so you would be keeping the old protocols and taking the new ones?
That's right. But, I mean, the protocols were developed while he was an employee here, and I mean, not just his work, but the other people that worked in the group as well. So, I mean, we feel like that's company property, but we would be willing to compensate him for the work he's doing to improve the new protocols.
So just to better understand that, what would be your use for the old protocol? Does KPF have an idea of how that could be used?
You know, Mackenzie, we don't have any plans in the works right now, but since it is company property and it's potentially of some value, we would like to retain it just until we kind of suss out a little bit more what that is, and perhaps Gabe could help us with that.
And also with the consulting fee, are you saying you'll compensate him for the time it took him to develop the new protocol and for the integration? Because, you know, the new protocol is property, so we thought it would make sense that they would exchange the old for the new, because something that's his for something, we understand that's viewed as company property, he's not disputing that. It just makes sense in his mind. So were you planning to pay consulting fees both on a backward basis and a going forward basis, or how did you envision that?
I appreciate that you're making a distinction there, because again, we do want to be fair to Gabe in this entire situation. We understand that he is not only a busy man, but a very, very smart man who is able to do math that we cannot even begin to comprehend.
I'm in your camp on that one.
That's why we went to law school. Right?
Exactly, right. Not numbers people. So going forward, like we said, we would like to retain the old protocols, but we are willing to compensate Gabe in some way for the time that he's invested in this project already.
Right. So I guess right now we put out an offer. It's 1.5 times the salary going forward for all of the consulting work, and he could publish his proof just as soon as the foundation is secure with the new protocols in place. Are you in a position to make us a counteroffer?
Well, first, I still don't. I'm struggling to see what value he's getting for the new protocol. You've mentioned that you clarified that it was a consulting fee on a going forward basis. So what does your offer kind of include that makes sense for the old protocol?
Well, I mean, part of the value
For
that
the
he's
new one.
getting is he loves this foundation and he's making it secure. Right?
So you're asking for a donation?
Well, I mean, that's not really what we're asking for, although a donation would certainly be welcome.
Absolutely.
I guess
I'm sure it
if
would.
you could quantify for us how much time he's actually spent in developing the protocol, that might assist us.
That would be helpful.
I don't think we can quantify, and just so, I don't know that you guys are speaking on this, but this was developed after his time
Right.
at the
Understandable,
foundation, so
yeah.
we don't want to.
Right.
I
On
just
the
wanna
same
make
page there.
Okay. So yeah, I just, we can talk about that. We're looking for a swap of ownership, because we feel like that recognizes that you guys have value for the new protocols, and he has value for the old protocols. He's hoping to explore where he can use those, and he has some ideas, but we feel like that would be
That's
great.
very important to our client.
Okay.
The exchange
okay.
is something, that's a
Well,
key priority.
That's definitely something we can hear and respond to. If you could wrap that up into a complete counteroffer for us, just so we know where you're at.
Absolutely. Jeff, would you like to run through that? Would you prefer to
I can write it on the board. You want to hit that?
Sure.
Just so it might be easier to see these all at
Yeah,
once, rather than
Go
having
for
it
it.
all the time.
Yeah.
So we hear that you kind of very understandably have a concern with him publishing the proof before we've installed the new protocol. So what we would ask is that he could submit the proof for publication under confidentiality so we can get the publication process started. We know it takes several years to get through that, but we would have to commit any publisher to not actually put it out until the new protocol is in place. So that's kind of trying to address your interest while also addressing our, Gabriel's interest about getting this information out as soon as possible. Again, we would ask that we exchange the new protocol for the old protocol. We feel that this is very fair, as this is providing a new value that your client needs in exchange for an old value that doesn't really serve any current purpose for your client and could be meaningful to our client. Gabriel's looking for a public acknowledgement that he is the designer of the new protocol. He would be willing to work with you on a consulting basis for the integration of the new protocol, and he'd be looking to do that at 2 times his consulting fee, and this would be because it is very complicated work, and he is under a lot of time pressure, so his time is very valuable to him right now. Mm-hmm. And he also had the idea that maybe once the new protocol is in place, we could have a joint press release that both brings great attention to the new credibility and security of the crypt dolls, and also brings him kind of that reputational benefit.
Okay, just so I understand, I think I've got everything here. The 2 times, that is being paid in crypt dolls, correct?
No, that would be in USD.
Yeah,
Thank you for that clarification.
That's an important one. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
I think, if we're talking about how we can mutually benefit our clients, not only bringing acclaim to the work that your client has put his blood, sweat, and tears in, and the program that Ella's worked her entire life to develop in order to help these countries, we're thinking a little bit more along the lines of paying Gabriel or compensating him in cryptols. In fact, our client's going to insist on it. And honestly, what better way to show his commitment to the security of this program than to putting his money where his mouth is, literally. And I think that's something that we could highlight in the joint press conference that you guys are talking about. I think that's a fabulous idea.
And one of the things, just to be fair, we understand that potentially that occasionally there's a currency exchange that could actually go in negatively. And so because of that, if you're willing to agree to the cryptols, and frankly, any deal we reach today has to include that,
that's helpful
we're willing to compensate that with a little bit more in case the exchange goes against them.
Perfect. We have discussed this with our client, and he very much supports KPF and cryptols. However, he views it as something that's designed for people in developing countries who are looking to have very small transactions, so he doesn't really feel that the currency is appropriate for this. So that's why he is hesitant to take the currency. I hear you saying that that's necessary, and I'm glad to hear you saying you understand that his concern will be that if he's compensated in cryptols, it'll just have to be a higher compensation rate. But we're glad to hear that we're kind of moving on the same direction. So we can be flexible on that, but it will require a higher multiple.
Okay, perfect.
And that's definitely something we can talk about. But as we're compensating Gabriel more and more, it would be helpful to us, especially as a charitable foundation, anything he can do to help us get the Cryptol name out there and publicize a lot of the work that's being done to help these people. I think that would be absolutely something that we would be interested in. In fact, we were thinking along the lines something of an endorsement, a public endorsement, in addition to the press conference, but him putting his stamp of approval on the Cryptol project. We can feature him on the website, and I think that'll go a long way to getting him some of the public acclaim that he's really looking for.
So I think that's great. So the public website. Now with this, we talked about between his work at the Center for the Advanced Mathematical Studies, CAMS, much easier to call it CAMS. Mm-hmm. So we talked about that, the integration. He's going to be working diligently to get this proof off the ground and in the publication process. So when you're talking about an endorsement, are you asking him to take on any additional burdens of time? Because that would be something we would be a little hesitant. Otherwise, I think as long as that's not a problem.
Yeah, the endorsement that we're looking for is like a public statement, saying I'm 100% behind this, and this is now secure. We've solved the problem. We can even play him up as the hero, because he is, just to be honest with you, and say this problem is now solved, and this foundation will be secure. Cryptol is a secure currency.
Yeah, so no greater time investment other than just to say, I'm Gabe, I endorse this company.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, in that case, I think we're ready to make you a counteroffer then.
Great.
As long as we can agree to a deal in cryptols, we can pay Gabe double his prior salary that he was making, and we can even give you a 50-50 split on whatever licensing deal or whatever sale he's able to work out with these protocols. We would be willing to share that with him, since he not only helped develop them, but now he's identified a financial use for them, so we could actually split that 50-50. The submission of the proof with the confidentiality, the only way that could potentially work for our client is if not only does he sign a confidentiality agreement with us, but whoever he wants to release that to has to sign one with us. We don't want to be the third-party beneficiary having to deal with that in court. We want to deal with us directly.
Sure.
Okay. And then we've already talked about the public acknowledgement, the joint press release as well. One other thing we'd like is an ADR, just because we are friends, the two parties are friends, so we don't want to go to court. We don't want anything to be a public record that the news is going to pick up on, oh, there's strife within the foundation. Just a good faith effort. We're going to come back and we're going to resolve this through ADR rather than going to court to deal with it.
Yeah, and as lawyers, I think we all understand clients don't intend to not get along, but if he's having a public endorsement, the ADR, I think, would benefit the mission of the
just in case,
organization.
Yeah, just to keep everything out of the press, submit it to binding arbitration, and we can have that governed by the American Arbitration Association rules, just to keep everything on the up and up.
We understand. So when you were talking about, and I heard an exchange of the protocols, but it sounded like this wasn't a full exchange. This would be exchange of the new protocols for 50% of the old one. You're asking for... Okay.
No, you're right. The foundation would get 50% of any proceeds that come from licensing or sale of the old protocols.
Okay, so it's not a just swap of intellectual property.
No.
That's correct.
So I'm a little troubled that we haven't seen much movement. You just met our same consulting fee and switched it to Cryptol. So I don't know if you could move a little bit more on that, because we're not at something we could say yes to yet.
Well, our prior offer was 1.5 times paid in Cryptols, and now we're saying 2 times paid in Cryptols. So we have come up.
Can you move any more on that?
I mean, well, if you'd make us a counter offer, maybe we'd be able to entertain something.
Yeah, so I think generally this is a framework we're going to need to work on. The exchange of the protocols and the cryptos, I think, are really holding us up. With design credit, because it sounds like we have to submit to
Full design credit.
Yeah, we are
full
totally
design
willing
credit.
to
Fantastic.
not
And
only give him
submit-
credit, but promote him as the genius that came up with the solution.
That's right.
We wouldn't mind that a bit.
Yeah.
So submit for publication with the confidentiality. We talked about that. The joint PR, we've added, not on the board, the ADR and the endorsement as well. So it sounds like we're getting the two main issues left on the table are the consulting fees and how we're going to swap these protocols.
Yeah, and we're totally still willing to work with you on those two terms if you can tell us what your client is looking for a little bit more.
Yeah, so we would like to come back to you with a counteroffer. I feel like we've summarized generally where we're at. We're going to take a little caucus now, if that's okay with you, and try to figure out exactly some sort of way where we can hear what you guys are saying and get a counteroffer for everyone.
Sounds
No
great.
problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that time. It's helpful to kind of wrap our heads around. There's been a lot happening, but I think we're really moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and we need a little caucus there because it's just a little bit.
It's a lot of terms.
A lot of terms, I think we're just viewing the world differently. And so we're going to put up a counteroffer, and maybe this isn't, you don't have to let us know in the framework yet. So I think we're agreed on this. With the exchange of the protocols, we're still looking for an entire swap of ownership. So complete ownership of the new protocols where they're valued, complete ownership of the old protocols with us where they're valuable. However, we hear that you guys are looking to get some sort of monetary revenue out of that when understanding foundation, just in an entirely different range. So what we see, we are able to offer 2% of net profits from the old protocol. He's going to be undertaking a new venture, possibly to find value in that. So we feel that keeps the incentives aligned where it needs to be. And we talked about consulting fees. He significantly values US dollars way more than cryptos. We understand that we need to work within the crypto framework, so understand where we're coming from, that because of the currency fluctuations, this number is going to be higher than it would have been for US dollars, given that we need to work with that. So we are able to come with 4 times his consulting fees, and then we would, hearing where you guys need to work, we will be able to do cryptos as that currency base to do 4, and I think we can add our endorsement and the ADR, and we're getting all the terms up there. We're running out of space.
I know, it's because there's so many.
I think that's good because I think we're finding a lot of values. So that is a framework where we are able to come back at you.
You know, Jeff, it's really good to hear you are willing to work with us on the exchange of the protocols. Mackenzie, you said earlier that that's a really important term to your client, and we want to be sensitive to that. And one thing that we just discussed with Ella on the phone was that she may be willing to exchange these protocols if we do have some sort of guaranteed share in the potential profits thereof. And really what that would look like for her, and I think it's going to help Gabe out a lot too, because we know he's looking for some credit here. So
Which he deserves.
Absolutely. So if we were to give him the protocols, we would be looking for a share, and we'd be perfectly willing to call that a donation in a press release, even, give him some kind of award for how generous he is for doing so.
Yeah, so just to flush that out into a full offer, what we're talking about is if Gabe was willing to come back and do the consulting for 2.25 times his prior salary. So in other words, 125% more than he was making, a little bit more than double, 2.25 times his prior. You're asking for 4, we were at 2, so 2.25 times that. We would be willing to give up full control of the old codes that we have here. What we would ask for is, rather than it being at 2% though, a 25% share in the profits and the humanitarian award that we would give him in exchange for that, and acknowledging how generous he is to the foundation.
And I think that's some good movement. That's still not in the range that our client is thinking. I'm a little concerned that our numbers are so different on the share of profits. We're a little concerned maybe they're just valued too differently. I don't know if you have any other ideas, if maybe they're valued too differently and the new protocol isn't something that would work. Do you have other options for addressing the security concern? Just because I'm concerned that maybe the valuations are too different.
Well, again, we want to make sure that we're compensating Gabe adequately, but in order to do so, we still need to make sure that we're meeting our bottom lines as a charitable foundations. So maybe, Mackenzie, you could enlighten me a little bit as to which is more important for Gabe. Is it the flat-out compensation and the number of cryptols we're offering him, or is it possession or ownership and share of the revenue from these protocols?
I'd have to tell you that, we've only been given so much authority on both. So, there's going to have to be the right package and the right combination. I don't think he views it as an exchange exactly. I don't know if is there sort of a trade-off that your client has in mind, or is there specific monetary pressures? Because this is a new revenue stream. This is making it more secure than it's ever been and bringing in more money possibly than they've ever had. So this is adding value that wasn't there. This is expanding the pie. So if you can help me understand.
Well, that's an excellent point, Mackenzie, that this is something that's going to only potentially help us in the future. I think one hesitation that Ella does have is given the fact that we have had this security, I don't want to say breach, but security issue
Weaknesses
with the old.
have been identified.
Exactly, in the protocols. If, for any reason there were to be a situation like this again, not that we're envisioning that there would be one, but even if there's any difficulty in integrating this, that we could potentially have Gabe kind of warranty his work in some way. I think that'd be a huge value add for the foundation.
And I think that makes sense for both parties, because if he's coming out and putting his stamp of approval and he's saying this is now secure, he doesn't want it to come out that in fact there is a weakness and that he wasn't able to identify, and it turns out that it's not. So in addition to that, we would actually be willing, if we identify a problem, to notify him first and give him the first option of fixing it before it ever becomes a public story.
So just so I don't want to get too far off the discussion. We can touch back on this warrant idea. Mm-hmm. Let's keep that open for discussion.
Okay.
I'm just afraid we are hoping to reach an agreement today, and it sounds like we are in totally different worlds on this percentage. We're 25 and 50%, and we're around the 2%. Okay. And this is totally, so is there another avenue we need to explore, or is there some flexibility on that 25%?
Let me just explain to you where we're coming from on that.
Yeah.
So we've got company property, and apparently Gabe has identified that it's valuable. He's found some uses for it, and if in fact it's involved with financial institutions, potentially very valuable. And rather than us giving it up entirely, and I understand that it's going to be an exchange here, but if the company has property that is potentially that valuable, then the company, being a foundation particularly, and a charitable one at that, needs to get a bigger percentage of it. I'm not saying it even has to be 25. If you make us a counteroffer, we're willing to entertain it.
So just the larger the number, the more valuable it is, the larger percent you need of it. Is that what I'm following?
Not necessarily. If you can identify a specific value for it, that would probably help us out.
That would be so helpful. But as it's an entrepreneur, just like with cryptos, we don't know where this will go, so we cannot do that for you. But, we've given you the last offer. We'd love to hear. We've explained to you we really need a lot of movement from your last offer on the percentage. We'd love to hear your response.
Let me just, actually, we had the last offer. I didn't write it up here, but I'll go.
Oh, okay. Sorry, then I just missed it.
Just to recap where we are, the last offer was from Chris, and it was a compensation at 2.25 times Gabe's previous salary when he was working with the computer guys. We would also be giving him his old protocols in order to compensate him for the work that he's done in developing the new protocols.
And I'm just going to write warranty over here because we haven't settled on that, but it's
That's
Can we
great.
put it in parentheses maybe?
Yeah,
I'll put a
I'm going to let you know we
question mark
don't
by it.
have authority from what we understand to give a warranty. We just hadn't talked about that with our clients. That's something we could bring back to him. Maybe
That
the
would be
idea of a right to
fantastic.
first fix it would be your second. You mentioned that as well. That's something that I think we'd be more comfortable to. But he hadn't contemplated a warranty, so we're not sure where he would fall.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's understandable, and we're definitely flexible and willing to hear back from your client. We're just trying to be creative and think of some ways that we can add some value for our client, just to flush out the last offer. Again, 2.25 times compensation for the work to integrate the system.
In Cryptols.
In Cryptols. Important distinction. A swap of the old protocols with a 25% donation of any revenue that would come from them. Again, all the other terms that we've already included, including the ADR, binding arbitration, all of that good stuff that's up on the board. Are you prepared to make as a counteroffer?
So we appreciate the movement, and I think, as we said, this framework is quite a bit away from where we're going. It sounds like you guys don't want to explore alternative options. Like, this is the framework we sound like we want to stick with. So we're going
If
to
you have something, we're willing to entertain
yeah.
it.
So it's going to have to once again be a significant movement. I think we're going to be pretty still far apart on numbers. However, I think there's a lot of value here. So where we agree is that we can come up here rather than 25%. That's just a different number. We are able to move to 5% of net profits, and once again we can go to 3.5 times on the cryptos. We're just 2.25 isn't. We don't have authority to get down there, so we can get 5% here and 3.5%, and that is. We can either look at doing an agreement today. If this warranty issue is significant today, we might not be able to reach an agreement today.
But we are happy to bring that back to our client.
Yeah.
That's something we're willing to
can
explore.
agree
Why don't we
to
just
that at
table
this
that
point.
as
Yeah.
a term, and we'll just say that we're going to have a good faith effort that he's going to try to fix it if there's a
I
problem.
mean, it would be
I think we can live with
devastating
that.
for his reputation if there's any problem. So we're definitely aligned on that.
And I think you guys know his professional reputation. He's worked a lot with the foundation before. I think they respect one another. They understand the type of work he does, and that he's a man of his word, and he'll come through and solve that. So I don't know if we want to reach an agreement today without that.
Sure.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, and honestly, that was just an extra thing that we were thinking about.
We
The
appreciate
issue
it.
with him being as smart as he is, I mean, he's the one that identified the weakness initially, right, in the first system. And he told us there was going to be a problem, and he was right. So if he says this thing is perfected, we feel confident in that. That was just an additional term, and we don't have to have it, but we know he's a man of his word, and he's going to try to fix it if there's a problem.
Appreciate the flexibility.
You know,
Yes, insane.
looking at where we are right now, a little bit earlier I asked which was more important, the share of the old protocols or the consulting fees going forward. And just to put some cards out on the table, because we really do want to reach an agreement here today so we can make Cryptols as safe as possible. Looking into the future, since we don't know how profitable these protocols could potentially be, we know there's some value out there. It makes a little bit more sense for us, looking at our client's budget and everything that they have to account for. We could maybe give a little bit on the share of the protocols if you're willing to come down on what what Gabe would be
So what do you
receiving for
have
consulting fees.
I hear some flexibility, and I think we're getting some momentum going, which is fantastic. So what did you guys have in mind? I know we're kind of trying to find a range that works for everybody. We started out in kind of different ballparks, so I think we're kind of exchange of information, getting closer to an idea, because like we said, I think everybody's on the same team here, and we're trying to find something that works for both sides. So what did you guys have in mind in terms of numbers?
We could compensate Gabe at 2.5 times his prior salary, so moving up from 2.25 to 2.5. Again, that would be in Cryptols. Every offer from this point forward would be in Cryptols.
Sure.
And instead of getting 25%, we would be willing to come down to 15%.
So we're moving up from 5 to 15%.
That's
Correct.
right.
We want to show some
We're moving
flexibility in
down
our
from
numbers.
25 to 15
Yeah.
as well.
We understand. We're in kind of different ballparks, but I'm glad we are trying to send her in.
We appreciate the movement. We still appear to be valuing these things very differently, so we still have some work to do, but we're glad to see that we're still trucking forward and moving ahead.
what we're here for.
Absolutely. So it sounds like it's more difficult to pay the consulting fees because, as you mentioned, the exchange of the protocols is something that is just a value add. It's something that they've never had before, so this is nothing but expanding the pie, which is exciting for both sides, thanks to, as you've mentioned, his brilliant brainchild. So I think we're willing to come down from our 3.5 to 3.25. The profits, we don't have as much to move on. I mean,
I was
this
thinking,
is, sure,
yeah,
Jeff.
we were looking at more of them in the 7% range, which is still, I know we're kind of different ballparks, so you guys are asking for twice as much as that, and we're really trying to move here.
Well,
So I think we can come in with 7%, that gets us a little closer. We're starting to run out of movement, but does that get something where you guys like?
you know, Jeff, I hear what you're saying. Things are getting tight, and we're kind of getting to the point where things are starting to bend a little bit. I think, you know, honestly, again, the consulting fee is more of Ella's concern going forward, just because we are working with that limited budget. I think there's maybe some non-monetary ways in which we could compensate Gabe for his services. We've already discussed many, including the award and things like that. We would be willing, in addition to everything else that we've discussed, to create a position for Gabe on our advisory board. That wouldn't be, you know, the board, but our advisory board. It would kind of be like a ceremonial title. He could feel free to put that on his resume. It would not only echo the design credits that we've already been getting him, but, you know, just something else to really tie his contribution to the Cryptol project together a little bit more. Do you think that would add some value for him, so that we could maybe come down on those compensation figures?
I love the idea, and I think the partnership is something he's interested in. That doesn't help at all with the numbers necessarily, but I think that cementing the partnership, who knows what future brainchilds and unexplored value and pie expanding opportunities they could be.
Yeah, and
I mean, I hear that the consulting fee, I hear in response to this last offer, the consulting fee is still difficult, but it sounds like we're okay on the profit. So if we could move a little on the consulting fee, it sounds like this is an acceptable range on the protocols. Is that kind of hearing?
We're getting close. We're getting really close on the protocols. We're still a ways off on the salary, just to be honest with you.
Okay.
And just to flesh out this advisory, I know you said it doesn't affect the numbers, but just so you understand, the reason we went with advisory board as opposed to a position on the board of trustees is there's no liability attached to it.
Exactly.
Right?
We don't want him to have to incur any
it can
additional
only be a bonus.
responsibilities.
That's
We
fantastic.
appreciate it. I don't think he would mind being involved with this mission.
That's wonderful. Well, could you maybe wrap that into a complete counteroffer for
So I think we had the last one on.
You're right. I'm so
I was
sorry.
I was about to.
I meant to say that.
Hit it, Chris.
I did the same thing, so it's a lot flying around.
Yeah, we can, and we're really approaching our limit. We can pay him 2.75 times his prior salary if we can agree on a 10% share of the profits from the protocols, and that would include all the terms that we've already got on here.
Okay, and I think, so we're going to 10% and 2.75.
Yes. And again, I just want to make sure you understand, we're not saying that he's not worth more. We know that he is. We're just saying that's how much we can afford to pay him.
Absolutely, and we appreciate the movement. So we appreciate all these creative ideas. One thing that's came up before, and we're just curious, we've talked about design credit. Is there any flexibility on the old protocol's design credit? I know we've already assigned. Earlier, he demanded not to have any credit associated with that. Would it be some area where he could get credit for those old prototypes? Would that be something, because I think if we get in that might be something where we can work on this
Are you
deal.
looking at sole credit? My understanding is he was part of an engineering team that put it together.
And he has currently no credit. So if we could get sole credit, that'd be fantastic.
I think that just reflects
would-
the truth. I think we'd be
absolutely,
willing
yeah.
to do that.
So we'd be able to get credit on those old protocols.
As a member of the team that produced them, yes.
Yeah, as a member of the team. So we can add that in there. And I think that is fantastic. So I'm just we've talked about a few more non-number stuff, some of the more fun stuff where we're
The
getting
extras,
our teams back together. So we're going to talk about team credit for old protocols. And then we're going to do the advisory board, knowing that We appreciate the consideration that there isn't liability associated with this, and maybe it's a slightly less time, but it brings prestige of the CAMs to the board and gives him some prestige as he's trying to advance his career going forward. So we see that. We are really close. I feel like you guys were bumping up against our authority. So I think there might not be a lot of flexibility on both sides, and something where we're both happy to get a deal on some of these issues. So we think with this team credit offer, we're willing to go on your side. We're at 7% and 10%. That'll let us go a little bit more of a half. We can come to an 8% of net profits here. I think that would be something we can work with. We are then able to come to 3 times in triples. There's no space left on here. I want to be able to go here. Right. That seems to be the center number.
That works.
We hope you have authority to do that. That is something we're going to need to get authority going forward. So that is something we're able, if we can get on your side of that with 8% of net profits, is that something you guys can live with? We talked about this warranty. I think we have everything up here on the board.
Can I just jump in there? You mentioned something that I think could add a lot of value for our client that would cost nothing to your client. And that was, you mentioned kind of we could structure this as a donation, so it would be a tax deduction. So if we could just structure the payment of that 8%, so we would have a binding agreement that it would come to our client, and then he, would have an understanding that he would donate it. So it could be a tax deduction. Is that acceptable to you?
We actually talked about that. I'm not sure that you could have a contract that requires someone to make a donation, but we can certainly, whatever we can do on our part that makes it tax friendly from his standpoint, we're certainly willing to do that.
Fabulous.
We like tax friendly.
Absolutely.
But also legal.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah. None of us want to go to jail.
I see we're getting close on time here today. It sounds like we're in agreement on many, many terms, and I think our clients are going to really be happy with what we've come up with here today.
Yeah, I guess we're so close. We can meet you at the 300. The 3 times his prior salary, and let's just split the difference on the old codes. We were at 10. You guys were at 8. Can we go 9?
We're really going to stick at 8 here. We've really pushed our limits.
We thought we got more on your side on that 7 to 10. Is that 8 something you guys?
Okay. Well, if you're at 7 and we're at 10, 8 is more on your side, right?
Again, this is a value. This is a value add. We're bringing just 8%. This new revenue stream. So we really feel that 8% of net profits is fair, and we've come a long ways, but we really think that this is a fair deal. Is this
I
something you could say yes to?
There is a tremendous amount of difference between 8 and 9%, but is that a deal breaker? We can't do 9?
It is not a deal breaker. Is 8 a deal breaker on your side? Because we would like to get an agreement today.
Yeah, we'd really feel more comfortable taking 9 back to our client.
Can we split that and do 8.5?
I think we can do
8.5.
I think at
split
8.5.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it was really great.
This up here. Yeah. So just to summarize, I want to make sure we didn't miss anything here. Correct me if I'm not getting anything here.
Yeah.
Can we, and just to make it clear, can we actually turn the page and just have a nice clean page for everybody, so there's no confusion at all?
Hold this so we can see. Would that help, Steph?
What?
I'm going to hold this so you can just see what we've written.
So, to the extent we can, so we're going to read. I like this. So we have submit for publication.
All right.
And this is going to have
some iron
and
plan.
this is going to have the confidentiality
Just make sure there's
of
no
publisher
privity contract issues.
And our client engaged.
And third parties in the foundation.
That'd be the publisher.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you submit for that. We're going to exchange protocols. And we're going to do 8.5% of net profits.
Mm-hmm. In a tax-friendly manner.
As much as can be achieved.
As much as really possible.
Tax-friendly.
Perfect.
Make sure we have this design credit, and he's getting the new. New is him.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe. Old, he's getting added to the team.
That'll be after we strip out the insecure part.
After this cap. So we're doing 3 times consulting in cryptos. Now we have all the fun stuff. The joint PR. We have the advisory board. Can you read these to me?
Oh, yeah. And then we have an endorsement. ADR advisement board.
ADR.
And I think that is it.
Do we have an agreement on those terms?
We do.
It
Alrighty.
sounds like we do.
Chris and Katie, thank you guys so much.
It was so nice to
Pleasure
talk to
working
you.
with you.
What we'll do is we'll go ahead and take this back, draft it up, and then send it over to you so you can submit it to your client. Thank you again. It was
I
very
think
nice
Dave
to
and
work
Ella
with
are
you.
going to be extremely excited about this. Thank you guys so much for your time and for your courtesy. So thank you again for judging and taking the time to be with us this afternoon. My name is Jeff, and I'm on Team L, and this is my partner, Mackenzie.
Yeah, so we're here today to answer two questions. The first being, in reflecting on the negotiation, what are some things we do the same and what are some things we do differently?
So I thought one thing we did well was from the very beginning, we tried to lay out a collaborative approach, really focus on interests. I think they, from the gun, wanted to go straight into questions and inquire about us, what we were coming from. And I think Mackenzie did a great job of slowing down from the very first statement we had to lay out our client, to let them understand what's important to him. He's at the Center for Advanced Mathematical Studies. He is worried about the mission, but he's also primarily focused on advancing his career, and that's going to be important today to meet those interests for a framework of a deal today. I thought she did a fantastic job of slowing down and getting that out there as a priority.
We felt that being really upfront with our interest and reputation, we were able to add a lot of extra value. They came up with a lot of great ideas. We came up with a lot of great ideas that added to that reputational interest and his academic interest, like getting extra credit, extra positions on the advisory board. So we think by being upfront, we were able to create a lot of extra value.
And I thought we showed a lot of flexibility on the process negotiation. It was something that wasn't ever explicitly brought up, but we were quickly aware that they wanted to work right away into offer, counteroffer, get something on the board, and really do a lot of passes. Because right away they got right to an offer and they wanted to get going. And I thought we would prefer to do more interest gathering to see what both sides need. But I think we were able to adapt to their situation, work in that offer situation, but then continue to ask questions to develop the interests of both sides to see where there is mutual benefit.
I think we were willing to be flexible with the process. We were willing to also be responsive when they would stay. It needed to be in cryptals. We would listen, kind of restate, and try and move to be flexible. So I think they did a nice job of signaling when it was a hard line, and we tried to do the same. And then to move, like with the publishing, understanding that they needed a delay and moving to accommodate that delay. Because in this negotiation, not only was there kind of the current issues, but there was a larger relationship that needed to be kept intact. And so we think we were able to meet our client's interests while also preserving that ongoing relationship.
Absolutely. And I thought we did a really good job with the teamwork, to be in sync, to have a unified message. Mackenzie and I thought we did a great job of that. I thought she did a fantastic job when I came back with a counteroffer after the caucus. And they had thrown out 50% and 25%. And we could tell we were just in totally different ballparks. So we came back with 5. And I think Mackenzie then emphasized to them that this is new revenue. And if we need to explore a whole different ballpark, a whole different framework of a deal, because we're clearly on different numbers, I think that communicated to them very forcefully, like, if this is new revenue, let's start talking about numbers that seem to be closer to what we're working with.
Something I think we do differently is things started going really fast at the beginning and we tried to slow it down. I think we were able to kind of take a breath with the caucus and then slow it down and make sure that we weren't leaving any value on the table. But I think it would have been, if we had to do this again, we would try and slow it down a little sooner.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time. Go ahead.
Our second question is, how well did our strategy work in relation to the outcome?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing with our strategy is you always have to look at what's the alternative. What else are we going to do, and what's our best alternative?
To look at what would the alternative
be to a negotiated agreement. Apologies for that. So we were looking at, he didn't necessarily have a use for the new protocols, they did. They didn't have a use for the old protocols in a little bit, we did. So we saw a deal obviously made sense, and it made no sense to keep the protocols in these hands. And not making an agreement today didn't advance our client's interests at all. He couldn't publish, he wanted to be a man of his word and not publish the Roalfo proof without their permission. So we needed to reach an agreement today. And so from that framework, we're trying to find ways that met their interests so our client's interests could also be met.
And with putting up the first offer, we were able to anchor. One way we anchored is we were discussing net instead of gross profits, which is a huge value add for our client. And so we think that we were approaching at the top of our numbers, but that difference in net and gross will be a huge value add.
Absolutely, and I think our client hadn't considered getting back credit on the old protocols. We understood that his concern originally when he demanded not to be associated with them was the risk of security, that the row alpha vulnerability that he eventually proved was the problem. And so we saw now that that is solved, there's no reason not for him to get his proper credit. We thought it'd be something difficult for them to say, no, at this point we don't think he should get credit, and we really think it'll advance his career interests in ways he hadn't considered.
Our client came in with really two primary interests, advancing his own reputation as an academic and a superior mathematician, and we think that there's a lot of things that he's going to be able to add to his resume and will make him shine. It was also to see KPT, the cryptols, and continue to grow and succeed, and we think we also provided them with enough flexibility and support that the cryptols are going to be better off after this deal. So our client's two primary interests we think he'll be thrilled about.
Yeah, especially with all the additional things, that it's hard to assign a monetary value to the advisory board and to the joint press release and endorsement. It's very difficult for us to integrate those without calling our client like, hey, is it worth a little bit less if you can be involved, be back on good terms? So when
you were discussing your strategy before coming in here between you, knowing that there was going to be some limitation on their financials, did you consider them that you had to be thinking of these out-of-the-box added value but non-monetary options that you could suggest? Is that one of the things you...
Yeah, we had actually, so some of these ideas they brought up, we were prepared. We wanted him on the advisory board. We had considered board of directors. We didn't want that time commitment. And so we're like, advisory board would be a great position. Then when they bring up advisory board, we're like, fantastic, great idea. That's exactly what we were thinking.
And same with the joint PR. It's a way to meet both of those interests and just keep adding value to the table. And hopefully that's what we can do as lawyers, is expand the pie for our clients and bring value they hadn't even contemplated. So I think he'll come back and he'll be like, wow, you got everything I wanted and all this extra stuff I hadn't even thought about. Hopefully next time I'll double your fees. We'll see. But we think he'll be very pleased.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see his face when we bring this back to him. I think some of the creative solutions we brought just really help both sides. And he is interested in both sides, to echo what Mackenzie said.
And something that was also important in our strategy, something I've written on the top of my notebook, is be soft on people and hard on issues. And I think as lawyers, it's very important that we can work well with the other side while being strong advocates for our clients. And we think both sides were very successful at this. We both were, I think, strong advocates for our clients, but I felt a lot of collegiality. I thought there was movement. I felt that they were listening to our interests, and we tried to reflect when we would hear their interests as well. And I think this collegiality and being hard on the issues and soft on people really allowed us to make great deals for both of our clients.
Yeah, I think it ultimately served our issue. Not only do we have professional reputation concern, but I think at the end of the day, it served our clients' interest to use this approach.
And I think between Jeff and I as well, we've worked very hard to prepare as a team for this, and we have practiced kind of knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I think at the end, we were really down to the line, and we kind of drew a hard line and then also got flexible, and we were able to play off of each other to really slow it down and maximize the value. So there was a certain level of trust, and also kind of anticipating needs like clearing the board and making sure we were able to write it together. I think we were able to pass the baton successfully back and forth between each other, so we could kind of both be thinking about the problem and bringing the full value of two people.
Absolutely. I thought we were totally in sync. I'd love if you guys have any other questions for us today.
Well, there's a little more time, so somebody else doesn't have. How much time did you spend on the details that you talked about, and how important do you feel that is in a negotiation like this?
Do you have your chart you could show?
Yeah, so we had our charts of all the moves and all the various ways we can meet middle grounds. The difference between publication immediately, publication after they've met, or confidential publication where we can actually get in the submission process because it seems to take a while. So a lot of those moves we've planned out, and we could just move down the sliding scale and quickly communicate to each other, now's the next box, now's the new step. So we planned out almost all of our moves.
So we thought it's very important to have a spectrum and to really break things down as much as possible, so things, we're not making assumptions or lumping things together. So we really did try and have this matrix so we could really stretch it out and make sure we weren't missing value for our clients. We did try to really break it down and get into the details.
Does that address your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I think that's important to do, yeah. So you obviously.
Any other questions? anything you
Great. Well, really, thank you so much for your
Yeah,
time.
thank you again so much.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for judging today. Again, my name is Katie, and this is my partner, Chris, and we're so happy to be here. I'm a little starstruck to be here in the finals at Nationals. Ultimately,
It's a very big achievement, isn't it? Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Ultimately, we think Ella's going to be really, really happy today. Coming in here today, she told us that she did not want to exceed paying Gabe any more than 3 times his previous salary. And she wanted to make sure that we were paying that in cryptols. She also wanted to retain some right to the old protocols, but ultimately, if it impinged on any of her other goals, they weren't absolutely necessary to her. And she wanted to make sure that Gabe was publishing the new information that he had worked on only after the holes in the Crypthaler app had been fixed.
And I think she's actually going to be really happy because even though we had to get to our ceiling of 3 times the prior compensation that he was receiving, we figured out through some really good questioning that these old protocols are not garbage. They have a very valuable, potentially valuable application. In fact, they're dealing with financial institutions, possibly huge sums of money that are being transacted. And so that was key to us. As soon as I figured that out, we weren't going to zero on that. We were not going to relinquish full control of that. We wanted to make sure that we reserved that, and we ultimately got 8.5. And it was, at the end there, it was quibbling over 8 or 8.5%, but 0.5% of potentially millions of dollars is a lot of money. And we're talking about a charitable foundation, so we were fighting for every dime there. We also got an ironclad non-disclosure of the alpha row proof, so he's going to be able to go to the publisher and get the process started, but that takes years. And by getting this in place, not only with him individually, but with the publisher as well, we don't have to worry about third-party beneficiary contracts. So we've got a deal with the individual himself, Gabe, and we've got a deal with the publishing company themselves. And if either one of them breaches, then we're able to go after them and hold them accountable. We also were able to get an endorsement from him, and that was important to our client because by getting his name to come out as endorsing this as being safe, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, I'm trying to breathe.
I'm sorry, by getting him to come out and put his face on the organization, that's a commitment. I mean, we know that this man is proud of his work, and by saying that he's going to stand behind the work that the organization does and everything is secure, if there is a potential problem, we know he's going to come and fix it.
Yeah, a large part of our strategy here today was just making sure that we came into the room with the right attitude, with the right posture. We know that we're a charitable organization, and right now, the only way for us to keep doing what we're in the business of doing is to get Gabe to come back and help us out with some of these faulty protocols. So going to court and making having any sort of instability in this currency wasn't really an option. We wanted Gabe to know how valuable he was to the organization, and we kind of sussed out that was his primary motivation by asking a lot of really good questions. In fact, just to piggyback on something Chris had said earlier, one thing that he did particularly well is ask a series of crafted questions to get at the purpose or why Gabe really wanted some of these old protocols that he had developed while he was with the Crypthaler project. He asked not only do you have any projections for revenue sources in the future, but what are you going to use them for? And once we realized that they were going to use them for banks and financial institutions on Wall Street, we realized how valuable they were.
Yeah, I picked up from the way that they responded to the question when I asked about value, and they said, well, we don't have any specific numbers in mind. And I'm saying, ding, 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 they got something planned for this.
Right.
And so at that point, that's where the follow-up questions came from. Another thing that we wanted to find out is how close he was to actually having this perfected so we could figure out what kind of timeline we're looking at. It turns out he had already perfected it. And so that was one of our earlier questions. And even though they were very forthcoming in rolling that out, that was something that we wanted to find out for our clients' benefit so that we could project a timetable going forward.
Yeah, we also wanted to come in with a lot of creative solutions, things that were going to be a value add for our client and Gabe as well, that weren't going to cost us a lot of money. As a charitable organization, we were working within a limited budget. So a lot of the things that we came up with, some of them they said first like a press release, but we tried to add a lot of those in there, like an official endorsement, position on an advisory board that would not only insulate him from any liability, but also bring the prestige of him as this millennium problem-solving genius and the CAMS Institute that he currently works for to our project. So we thought that was a huge value add.
And you know, one of the things here is we're talking about old friends. These people were college buddies, and he turned down huge money in order to come work for the foundation. So he had offers from the NSA, he had offers from Silicon Valley corporations. He turned them down, took less money to come here. And so we also wanted to reward him for his loyalty that he had already showed to the organization, and we knew that our client would appreciate that as well.
Yeah. Things that were really important to them that we were able to get to, he really, really wanted credit not only for the work that he has done since leaving the Crypthaler project, but also for credit for what he had previously developed, which he had also previously asked not to be given credit for. So those were easy gives that cost our client nothing. We offered him a humanitarian award in return for donating some of the profits from these old protocols back to the company, and we thought that was a great way of not only making sure we're getting that income coming back in, but recognizing him for that.
And one of the things, we were trying to be flexible because we knew coming in here, this had to be a win-win. There wasn't going to be a party that won and a party that lost. We were going to sink or swim together. And so one of the things, when we tried to get a warranty in place, and we even broached the idea of a warranty, and they told us, we don't have the authority to do that. So what we tried to do is put enough things in place around that he would have every incentive to come back and do that if, in fact, a problem ever arose. He's obviously a brilliant guy. We're not envisioning a problem, but the job of a lawyer is to anticipate potential problems and insulate your client from them.
And I think another way that we did that was making sure that we had an ADR provision in place. We wanted that in case there were any problems in the future, that they would be submitted to binding arbitration with a good faith duty to negotiate first, just to make sure that we're, again, keeping this out of the public eye, keeping this out of the court system.
Yeah, one of the things that Katie does well, we've been a good team. A lot of people didn't anticipate that when they put us together, but she does a great job of laying out the roadmap. There hasn't been a single competition I've ever been in with her that she hasn't gotten the open and been able to lay the roadmap up for. She does a great job of recapping whenever there are offers going back and forth. I can keep track of them on paper, but I know it's really helpful to both parties and even to the judges to lay that out and to make sure that we get it up on a board or something like that. And reflective listening is something that's a great skill here. So when their other side is talking, she said, all right, I want to make sure I understand this. And she tries to figure out what part of what you're saying is really most important to you, and we're going to address that.
Yeah, I think...
I want to ask a question. Did you ever actually discuss the timeline for the publication of that proof?
I remember Mackenzie did say that they were anticipating it was going to be years, and based on the problem and how long it took them to get the initial, the question, the alpha row conjecture published, that was years. He submitted it for publication years before he even signed the confidentiality agreement with the company when he went to work for them straight out of college. So we did have some assurances with the confidentiality agreement that Chris talked about, not only with Gabe, but also that we would require any publishing house that he entered into a contract with, he would have to get them to come back to us and make sure we have an ironclad confidentiality agreement with them too, just to solve any privity of contract issues.
And we also talked about, what is the definition of the word publish? Exactly. According to our facts, our authority is that the holes have to be fixed, the new protocol is in place before it's published, and we interpreted publish to mean pen to paper out for the world to see, and so that we're well within our authority there in agreeing to that.
So you've talked about a lot of the things that you are glad that you did. Are there any things that you would do differently?
I think Chris already touched on one with the warranty. I said the word warranty, and that immediately set off bells in their head that said, ding, 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 we don't know if we have authority. And I think when we originally discussed the term, we meant something different from a warranty. We just kind of wanted him to be on call in case there were any bugs. And I would have liked to flush that out a little bit more, articulated it a little bit better, because I think we got hung up on that when we really didn't need to.
And maybe the choice of who is writing on the board, the person with the better handwriting, might have been the better choice there if Katie had written that. And then time management. We got down to the end, we were seconds away at the end. And there were a couple areas where we got bogged on. I think, even though I'm fighting hard for my client's interests, a couple of those weren't as significant to her. We could have given and maybe saved a few minutes there so we weren't as rushed at the end.
Yeah, I think Chris did a really good job of zealously advocating for the clients. I think part of the reason that we are such a good team is he is very attentive to detail. He's a numbers guy. He's a former math teacher, so he does a great job of keeping track of all of the offers, and also when they wrote up USD on the board and I was assuming that we were talking in cryptols, he made sure that we verified that we were all on the same page so we had a true meeting of the minds. He also, at the very end, when we were getting close to a deal, I was starting to think like, man, we can give them this. And he knew that those potential old the protocols were worth potentially millions of dollars, and 0.5% of $1 million is a lot of money and very valuable. So I was very proud of him for fighting for that last 5%.
Killed my soul to say that's why we went to law school, because we're not good at math, because I'm one of the few that actually is.
The time is up.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being here today, and congratulations on coming to this round. I know that you've been working very hard, and it is a great achievement. I never got to this level when I was a student, FYI. Overall, I think that both teams understood the mechanics of negotiation very well, and I could see a very good give and take on both sides. And you both get down to the agenda very quickly without having to go through so much of the initial introduction. And I did appreciate that. You spend a lot of time making offers and going back and forth. At some points, I feel like your team was pushing for an offer way too hard on this team, and this team was trying to slow you down. I could see that happening, and eventually it got to a speed that I found to be more acceptable, because there wasn't very much movement in the beginning to warrant a counter offer, and you just kept asking for that. But eventually that cleared up, and I guess that was just how the mechanism between the two teams worked. I was a little bit disappointed neither of you talked about when exactly to do the publication, because that is extremely important for both sides. Mr. Hart wanted it to be published early, and you need to remember that that publication has to be timed with when that protocol comes in, because if that publication comes before you've got the new protocol in, that would be a huge blow to your problem. And neither of you seem to recognize that that is a point of negotiation, and I just didn't understand why. So I was afraid I was missing that. I did ask your team about that. And it was like, did I miss that? So I don't know. But overall, I was very glad about your agreement in the end. I thought that both of you got very sweet deals for your client, and you did add a lot of values, and that's one great thing that both of you teams have done very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it's my turn. I think both sides in this negotiation did really well. I mean, I feel I'm a relatively experienced mediator, and I was very impressed with not only your degree of preparation, but the ability of both sides to validate the concerns of the other side, recognize what they were, inquire as to the detail of them when some terms that were used were ambiguous, and I thought you did a really good job. And I made notes of some of the language that each of you used that I thought was particularly helpful in a mediation. Things like, it's in our mutual interests. It's always good to make both sides feel like they're on the same page when maybe they really aren't. And saying things like, well, time is of the essence. These are old friends. As she said, your use of offer and counter offer, would show that, let's get down to business. These are the mechanics. Make an offer, we'll make a counter offer. Not until you make a counter offer are we going to make an offer. We're not going to bid against ourselves. So, I think you did a really good job in being specific about that kind of thing and getting down to business and making progress. So I thought that was really good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kenzie, you will always be heard in court. And that's very much appreciated. We have our written comments, and you'll get them, so we'll be very minimal here. The easel was well used. I thought there was good, especially good teamwork when you helped in the end. It's important for us as judges, but in real life, it's important for each of you just to the same extent to be able to use that so well. I thought the interaction within both teams was good. I liked your always a concise statement of your positions, and I liked your talking to us about reflective listening. I'll stand with the written comments for the rest of it. but congratulations just for being here in the final round. It's terrific.
I concur with the majority. Thank you very much. You all did an excellent job.
Thank you very
I
much.
also want to compliment you on what was obvious. You thought about a lot of these value-added, out of the box things that could add value for each of your clients, and I think that was important in this fact situation, and that you did a good job in thinking of things and suggesting things and explaining what exactly you meant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so
Really,
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, good luck.